Chapter 410. The man didn't expect that the beauty on the dance floor would invite him and immediately wanted to go in with an excited look. However, before he could approach Jean Wan, a black figure had entered the crowd. When Jean Wan was still crooking her finger at the man, his sharp eyes pierced the man's face like a cold sword. When the people around saw the tall and cold figure coming in, they were confused until a sharp-eyed person in the crowd suddenly said, "Mo, CEO Mo?" This Jialan bar was frequented by many rich people in High City. Even if not everyone could recognize Mo Jingshan, at least some people who had seen him or cooperated with him could recognize him. For a moment, the crowd suddenly fell into a strange silence, and some people who recognized him subconsciously stepped back. The man who had just been seduced by Jean Wan came over. Before he could touch Jean Wan's hand, his wrist was suddenly caught. That person was stunned for a moment. He only heard a cold word, "Scram." Before he could react, he was pulled back by a vice president of a company behind him. The vice president directly pulled him away from the battlefield in order to avoid being affected by the battle. The man was not reconciled. There were so many people on the dance floor, but the beauty only waved to him. He was about to go back when he heard the vice president say nervously, "That is the president of Mo Corporation. How many brains do you have? How dare you snatch his woman?" Jean Wan didn't stop and was about to continue crooking her finger at the others on the other side. Anyway, there were still some people who didn't recognize him and were about to approach her because of her smile and frown. However, in the exclamation of the crowd, Mo Jingshan directly clasped Jean Wan's hand and took her away expressionlessly. Jean Wan didn't resist or struggle. When she was taken out of the crowd, she staggered, which showed how strong Mo Jingshan was. She turned to look at Qin Siding, who came over. Qin Siding glanced at her and gave her a look that told her to take care of herself. However, she curled her lips into a smile. She turned back and smiled in the direction of the crowd. The moment the group of men whistled behind her, she felt the bones in her wrist, which was already very heavy, almost being crushed. Her entire body was violently pulled forward, and she almost hit the man's shoulder. Jean Wan couldn't see Mo Jingshan's expression. She only knew that his grip was strong and that she could barely keep up with his footsteps. She was dragged away from the crowd. When they reached a place with fewer people, he took her into an empty bathroom and slammed the door shut. Then in the next moment, she was suddenly pressed against the door by the man, and her back hurt from the impact. Her face only paled for a moment before she raised her head to look at the man's dark and cold face. "What? Wasn't he indifferent? You're already angry." Jean Wan leaned against the door and in the man's arms. Being restrained by him, she had no intention of escaping or avoiding him but just looked at him with a thin smile. She didn't need to look carefully to know that this was a men's bathroom. However, the customers that Jialan Bar usually entertained were all extraordinary, so even this bathroom was clean, and there was even a faint smell of sandalwood wafting in the air. But the first thing she smelled was the faint smell of alcohol and the familiar smell of grass on the man's body, as always. She was still smiling softly as if she wasn't provoking him. Her face, which usually had no offensive power, was suddenly so beautiful that it seemed to be full of offensive power. Her unique beauty made the man's usually calm eyes freeze for a moment. Looking into his eyes, Jean Wan shook off his hand that was imprisoned on her wrist without fear, and at the same time, put her two slender arms around his neck, pressed her body against his chest, and smiled casually. "Mo Jingshan, if you have the ability, continue to be indifferent. I really can't compare with you in terms of ruthlessness or means. I can only compete with you to see who can ruin themselves more. If you like to play this game, I'll play with you." The man narrowed his eyes coldly and looked at her closely with her arms around his neck. "You're very bold. How dare you come to such a place to make trouble? It's just a drink and a dance." Am I really too far away from those men who covet me? I was too obedient in the past. You told me to stay away from those men, so I stayed away. I'm so obedient that I didn't even accept flowers from other men. But I didn't even accept the flowers that other men gave me. Now that you can casually pull a woman who sells alcohol to sit next to you, can't I invite a man who is interested in me to dance with me? Ji-won smiled as she spoke. She looked up at him with her arms still wrapped around his neck. She leaned close to his lips to speak, but the smile in her eyes was cold. After the divorce, I have nothing to do with you. What can you do to me? Part of her dress was translucent, and her hair was wrapped around her neck. The faint cold fragrance of her body, mixed with the smell of brandy, soon occupied part of the air in the bathroom. When Ji-won spoke, she deliberately leaned against his lips. The man suddenly pinched her chin with a strength that almost hurt her. Ji-won still had a fearless smile on her face. "Mo Jingshin, if you have the ability, strangle me here." The look in his eyes was that he really wanted to strangle her to death. But he restrained himself. Ji-won clearly saw his restraint, just like how he usually did things. This man's restraint was too strong. No matter in any aspect, he could hide all his thoughts and emotions without revealing anything, so that no one could know what he was thinking or what he was going to do. He suddenly let go of her and took a step back, no longer touching her, and his eyes returned to their original calmness. "Ji-won, you can't change the trajectory of life just because you want to. What you should do is to go back to the beginning." His tone was indifferent, and his eyes were calm. Ji-won smiled. As the man continued to take a step back, she suddenly stepped forward and grabbed the collar of his shirt. Catching him off guard, or taking advantage of the fact that he didn't intend to do anything to her, she dragged him over and pushed him hard against the wall. She pressed him hard against the wall, grabbed the collar of his shirt tightly, and imitated him to imprison him. Chapter 411. Ji-won didn't answer but just looked at the man close to her. When her face approached him, he frowned coldly and his eyes were full of warning. She pressed him down with both hands. Even though she knew she couldn't hold him down, she still did so. She kept looking at his face, as though she hadn't seen him up close for a long time and wanted to see if he was really Mo Jingshin. Mo Jingshin looked at her, his calm eyes unfathomable and emotionless. He said indifferently, "Don't let what happened tonight happen again. The Ji family can't protect you now. If you keep messing around like this, you'll be the only one who suffers." How could he be afraid of her suffering? Ji-won laughed again and suddenly let go of his shirt collar. She didn't tidy up her messy dress or the hair tangled around her neck. She just raised her hand to turn the door handle with a sneer and abruptly opened the bathroom door. When she looked up, she saw Chin Siding, who had been standing outside for a long time. The cigarette in Chin Siding's hand had not been burned out. Seeing Ji-won coming out like this, he raised his eyebrows. Ji-won glanced at him indifferently and walked past him without saying a word. The bar was still noisy. Ji-won walked through the crowd. The men who had coveted her were looking for other targets on the dance floor. Suddenly seeing her walking out alone, two of them immediately followed her. However, before they could get close, they were suddenly stopped by two bodyguards in black. They watched the beauty walk out just like that. The two bodyguards looked regretful and sad, but the two bodyguards in front of them didn't look like they were easy to provoke, so they really didn't dare to offend them directly. The two bodyguards immediately went to the door and pointed in the direction Ji-won left. When Mo Jingshin came out, the bodyguard whispered, "Madam went into the hotel ahead and hasn't come out for a while." Mo Jingshin didn't speak. When Chin Siding walked out casually, he glanced at him indifferently. Chin Siding was expressionless. "Don't look at me. It's not like she's my woman. I can't care if she just wants to stay in the nearest hotel for a night or climb up to the rooftop of the hotel to commit suicide. After all, this hotel," he looked up and said expressionlessly, "is indeed quite high. Furthermore," Chin's sighting continued expressionlessly, "although this hotel is a 5-star one, it is near a street of bars. There are probably all sorts of people inside." Jean Wan went and dressed like that and swayed after drinking a little. If she was dragged into the room by someone, no one would know. Mo Jingshan coldly stared at him. He did not speak and turned to look at the 2 bodyguards by the door. The bodyguard hesitated and said, "Mr. Mo, it's not convenient for us to enter Mrs. Mo's room." With Jean Wan's current state, she did not wish to return to the Yew Garden. She did not want Auntie Chin to see her like this and become anxious. Or, she might as well call Grandfather Mo over. She did not want to go anywhere. After leaving the bar, she went straight to the hotel across the street. She went in and booked a room. She took the room card and entered the elevator. Under everyone's curious gaze, she entered her room like a wandering ghost. When she entered the door and turned on the lights, she did not pay attention. She turned on the air conditioner as well. Her clothes reeked of alcohol. She frowned and went straight into the bathroom. She entered the bathroom and turned on the shower. In order to wake herself up, she turned on the cold water and took a shower. She only showered for a few minutes. She just wanted to wake herself up. She had just turned off the water and wrapped the towel around her body. Before she could dry her hair, she heard the door open. Was there a problem with the hotel's security? Why would someone else open the door to her room? Jean Wan poked her head out and immediately met the man's gaze. That's right. Only her legal husband would have the ability to enter her room in the hotel without a hitch. Mo Jingshan saw the towel on her body and her long hair still dripping with water. He walked in, put a bag of clothes and the supper he bought downstairs on the table nearest to the door, and threw the long white dress she had thrown outside the bathroom into the trash can. Mo Jingshan took a look at the towel on her face and put it on the table. "I thought you would send someone else to see if I ran to the rooftop to commit suicide or lay on the balcony or something." Jean Wan returned to the bathroom to take out a towel. She came out while drying her hair. Then she leaned against the bathroom door and looked at the man's silent, cold face. "I didn't expect you to come in person." Mo Jingshan took a look at her, saying, "You're not the kind of person who is irrational. You should calm down after venting. There's no need to do such a wrong thing and let others worry about you too much." Jean Wan blinked to clear the mist in her eyes. She looked at the man with clear eyes. "Mo Jingshan, am I very strong in your eyes? Can I bear to be hurt and hit by you over and over again? At least, you're not weak." Jean Wan lowered her eyes. Her voice was indifferent as if she had no emotion. "Is there anything else you want to say to me?" Mo Jingshan didn't speak. "Or, you've been waiting for the moment I give up for so long that you have nothing to say to me, right?" The man's voice was still calm and emotionless. "Yes." Jean Wan smiled. "We agreed that we wouldn't divorce. We agreed that there would be no separation between life and death. It turns out that I really loved you too much. Now that things have come to this, it's a separation between life and death." Mo Jingshan looked at her clear, cold eyes and said indifferently, "You can take it that the Mo Jingshan you love has died in that car accident. The current me is no longer the Mo Jingshan you are familiar with." Jean Wan's pupils constricted. She stared at him motionlessly. She stared at his face and then slowly blushed. She froze for a long time before saying word by word, "Mo Jingshan, you're really an executioner who can completely feel all the veins in my body. You can easily control my weakness and know how to make me completely desperate." Mo Jingshan looked at the corners of her red eyes. His figure was imprinted in her eyes, but it was gradually dyed red. The man's eyes seemed calm and warm, but because of this calmness, they appeared particularly cold and cruel. She looked at this man and felt all the pain that had been accumulating in her heart for a long time piercing into her heart like thousands of arrows piercing through it. It was densely packed, thin, and sharp. All the pain covered her senses, making her feel so painful that she almost couldn't breathe. Chapter 4:12. 10 months or 10 years, it didn't make any difference to her. She always knew that Mo Jingxian would always be Mo Jingxian, whether in these 10 months or 10 years, he would still be Mo Jingxian. He was the man she had let down. He was the man she was so familiar with, but in an instant, he had become so distant from her. He was so strange. She looked at his eyes, which were calm and clear. He didn't deliberately look cold and distant, but he was extremely cold. Jean Wan couldn't cry. Her eyes were bloodshot. She looked at him with all the emotions in her eyes. All the despair and calmness attacked her. She clenched his collar tightly. Mo Jingxian, let go of me in the name of death. You can do it. You are so cruel. Jean Wan. Don't call my name. Her voice was very light and a bit determined. Aren't you dead? You're dead, aren't you? Mo Jingxian, from today on, I'll take you as dead. He did not answer, nor did he deny it. He only looked at her eyes that were on the verge of collapse. The indifference and heavy mist in his eyes made her sneer instantly. Get out, she said. He looked at her. I told you to get out. His eyes quietly and slowly entwined with her cold and hate-filled eyes. Mo Jingxian, you actually never really loved me. You're too calm. You know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. You know how to love and pamper me. You know how to be good to someone, but you never lose control. Just like now, you can completely calmly tear me into countless pieces. Jean Wan was so angry that she looked at him with a smile. The scariest people are those who know how to restrain themselves. The only person you trust is yourself. You never completely trust anyone else. You think everything you do is right. No matter what the reason or the situation is, you are right. Mo Jingxian didn't speak. He stood tall and straight in silence. His eyes were clear and sharp, and the coldness seemed to penetrate her skin and into her bones and blood. Jean Wan closed her eyes and pointed to the closed door. Either you get out, or I get out. He looked at the emotions in her eyes and did not move. Jean Wan abruptly lifted her feet to walk out. However, when she passed by the man, he grabbed her wrist. I'm leaving. The man's voice was as calm as ever. The door opened and closed, and the room returned to its original tranquility in an instant. However, standing by the bathroom door, Jean Wan could only hear her own heart pounding, pounding, pounding. The next morning, Jean Wan woke up with a start. She felt like she was suddenly kidnapped by someone. She covered her nose and mouth, unable to breathe. Then, those people locked her in a car and threw her into a very, very cold place. She was surrounded by snowy mountains, and it was cold everywhere. She was frozen stiff, and her limbs couldn't move. All she could see was a vast expanse of whiteness, and she couldn't see any other colors. It's very cold. The snowy mountain turned into a glacier bit by bit, and she was frozen on top of the glacier. It was as if someone had raised an ice arrow and aimed it at her heart, and with a swoosh, it shot towards her. No! Jean Wan abruptly woke up from her dream. The moment she woke up, she felt heavy and weak all over, and her head was so heavy that she could barely sit up. With great difficulty, she sat up in bed. The feeling of being filled with lead made it difficult for her to raise her hands to touch her hair. It was very cold, unbearably cold. Could it be that the dream could affect one's perception? Or was she trapped in the dream and hadn't woken up yet? Ji-Wan closed her eyes and sat on the bed for a while. Then she lifted the quilt and got out of bed, wanting to go to the bathroom to take a hot bath. As soon as she walked into the bathroom, she seemed to catch a glimpse of the number 16 degrees displayed on the air conditioner next to her. However, her mind was a mess, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. She walked straight in. It was too cold. Shivering, she sat on the edge of the bathtub, filled the bathtub with hot water, and unbuttoned her clothes with cold hands trembling. When the water was almost full, she stepped into the bathtub and shivered hard. Sitting in the pool of hot water, she felt warm all over. It had been raining in High City for 2 whole days, and the CEO's office of the MO Corporation was also overcast. Shenmue had always been familiar with CEO Mo's temperament, so he was very careful in his work and had almost never made a mistake. However, in the past 2 days, he had received frequent cold looks from CEO Mo. He had a feeling that he would soon lose his job. Auntie Chen had called the company from the U Garden yesterday. Before Shenmue had time to say anything, he was sent to a partner company in High City for an inspection. He didn't dare to say a word. When Shenmue came back, it was already the afternoon of the next day. He was usually very cautious in his work, and it was rare that he forgot about Auntie Chen's call because of his busy work schedule. When he received Auntie Chen's call again, it was almost time to get off work the next day. Special Assistant Shin, why can't I get through to Mr. Mo's phone? Yesterday, I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure how serious the matter was, but until now, I haven't heard from Mrs. Mo for 2 whole days. I'm afraid something has happened. Hearing this, Shenmue suddenly remembered that Auntie Chin had called him yesterday and said that she had something to talk to CEO Mo about. After hanging up the phone, he hurried to the conference room. The meeting had ended at 4:00 in the afternoon, but several department heads were still explaining other things to CEO Mo, so they hadn't come out yet. Shenmue waited outside for a while and took a look at the time. Thinking of Auntie Chen's anxious tone just now, he simply pushed the door open, walked quickly to Mo Jingshan's side, and whispered in his ear, CEO Mo, the U Garden called and said that Mrs. Mo hasn't heard from her for 2 days. Auntie Chen sounded very worried. I don't know what happened. Mo Jingshan paused and turned to look at Shenmue. When did she call? Yesterday, but I was temporarily sent to an inspection and forgot to tell her. Just now, Auntie Chen called again, so Mo Jingshan looked at the document in his hand, hesitated for a few seconds, and finally put it down, saying coldly, pause for now. Report it tomorrow. The department heads in the conference room looked at each other, but no one dared to ask why. Chapter 413. Mr. Mo, you don't come back every day, and Madam is getting thinner by the day. If this situation continues, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep it a secret. Elder Mo has always thought that the 2 of you are fine. If something happens to Madam, I won't be able to take responsibility. After hanging up, Mo Jingshan suddenly recalled that night 3 days ago, in the hotel opposite Jialan Bar. Ji-Wan was still awakened by the cold. She did not know how she had fallen asleep in the bathtub, nor how long she had slept for. She only felt that her entire body was cold. She instinctively felt that she could not continue sleeping here. She raised her hand and tried to hold on to the edge of the bathtub to get out of the water. However, waves of cramping pain came from her calf. The pain was sudden and sharp, causing her to tremble in the water. It was so painful that her entire body was stiff, as though she did not have the strength to move. How long exactly had she slept here? Why was it so cold? Her fingers moved in the water. They felt numb and numb. She wanted to turn her head to look for her phone, but she remembered that her phone and bag were placed by the bed. She had no choice but to raise her hand with great difficulty to continue holding on to the edge of the bathtub. However, the intense pain in her leg left her with no strength to even cry out, much less raise her hand. With great difficulty, she managed to raise her 5 fingers before returning them to their original position. Just the act of raising her fingers seemed to have consumed all of her strength. So cold, the pain in her leg came without warning, but bit by bit, it tore at her nerves. It was as though if not for the sudden cramping pain in her leg, she would not have woken up at all. Jean Wan's head was very dizzy. What surged forward was the boundless fear and loneliness in the darkness. She felt as though she was about to fall into an endless abyss, but there was nothing she could hold on to. This hotel was very luxurious. The bathrooms were air-conditioned, and the air was very cold. Jean Wan could no longer get up. She leaned against the water, her towel hanging on a nearby shelf. She looked at the distance of only 1 or 2 meters and felt that it was very strenuous. The pain in her calf came one after another. It was so painful that her entire body was convulsing. When she lowered her head, she could see the blue veins on her calf twitching. It was indeed a cramp. After sitting in the water for a long time, she finally realized that the water was actually cold. How long had she slept here? It was clearly warm before she fell asleep. Even if she wanted to get up now, she couldn't. She stared at the temperature displayed in the air conditioner on the wall. In a daze, darkness once again occupied the nerves that were barely awake because of the throbbing pain in her calf. All the clear senses gradually became blurred, and she fell into darkness. No one answered Jean Wan's call again and again. Mo Jingshan walked to the door of the room where Jean Wan lived. His cell phone was still dialing. When he approached, he heard the familiar ringtone inside, but no one answered it for a long time. "Open the door." He subconsciously grabbed the phone and ordered in a deep voice. The room service staff hurriedly took the room card and went to open the door. As she swiped the card, she explained, "Before this lady checked in, she specifically told us not to go in and disturb her, so we didn't go in for the past 2 days. Moreover, she paid enough room fees, so we, Mo Jingshan ignored her." The moment the door opened, he had already walked in. The moment the door opened, the cold air in the room was enough to cause all the hair on one's body to stand on end. This was an ordinary-sized room. With one glance, he could see the bottom of the room. Jean Wan's figure was not on the bed. There was only a cell phone and a bag. The man's tall and straight figure directly walked into the bathroom. The cold air in the bathroom was even more bone-chilling. Mo Jingshan's heart thumped. An ominous feeling instantly grew stronger. He turned his eyes to see Jean Wan lying in the bathtub with a pale complexion and purple lips. She just lay quietly in the water, motionless. What's going on?" The room service staff was a middle-aged woman. The moment she entered, she felt the cold air in the room. She turned to see the scene in the bathroom and subconsciously cried out. Mo Jingshan immediately leaned over to help Jean Wan up. Thankfully, the design of the bathtub was more user-friendly. There was a support point for her head to lean against. Otherwise, she would have fainted and drowned in the water. Jean Wan. The moment the man helped her up, he felt the coldness of her body. It was so cold that it seemed as though she was already dead. There was no warmth at all. Chapter 4:14. The room service staff hurriedly nodded in panic and ran out to make a phone call. Before he carried her out of the bathroom, he turned off the air conditioner in the room and carried her to the bed. He raised his hand to touch her face. It was still hot. Mo Jingshan picked up Jean Wan, who was dripping wet, and carried her out of the bathroom. If Jean Wan had been in the bathtub 2 days ago, it meant that she had been soaking in the cold water for 2 whole days. The woman's body seemed to have been frozen stiff. Except for the burning heat on her face, which proved that she was still alive, everything else was unusually quiet. Mo Jingshan put his hand on her neck and looked at her pale, bloodless face. For a moment, he stiffly held Jin Wan. The woman seemed to have no signs of life. He could only feel a very weak pulse on her neck, but it was so weak that it seemed that it would stop in the next second. He mechanically hugged her and wrapped the blanket around her. His palms rubbed against her palms in vain, trying to warm up her cold body, even if it was just a little bit. He did not dare to get close to her breath, fearing that he could not feel any breath except for the pulse on her neck. The ambulance rushed over, and the medical staff rushed in with the hotel staff. The doctor checked Jin Wan's body and anxiously asked the others to carry her into the car and send her to the hospital immediately. They could not waste a second. In the ambulance, the medical staff were busy, and Mo Jingshan sat by the stretcher bed. In his impression, Jin Wan loved to take baths and often liked to fall asleep in the bathtub. He was always worried that if she fell asleep in the bathtub, she might catch a cold or drown if something happened to her. She had been frozen when she was a child, and her body was still cold, so she was very afraid of the cold. She liked to snuggle into his coat in winter and lean against his arms to keep warm. When she slept, she liked to snuggle against him when it was cold, squirming in his arms, and looking for the warmest position to sleep. What he was most worried about suddenly became a reality overnight. At this moment, Jin Wan was lying quietly and motionless, her hands hanging by her sides without any reaction, and her body was not warm at all. The doctor was doing all kinds of emergency measures and kept urging the driver to hurry up. The ambulance rushed from the hotel to the hospital and was sent directly to the emergency room. When Qin Siding heard the news and rushed over, the first person he saw was Mo Jingshan. When he fell down, Jin Wan was still in the emergency room, and there was a red light on the door. Qin Siding glanced at the time and frowned. How long has she been in there? When the nurse at the side saw that Dr. Qin had actually come down personally, her expression was just as ugly. She immediately replied with a fearful expression, "He's been in there for 20 minutes. The patient was soaked in low-temperature air and cold water for a long time, causing a high fever of 40 degrees. Coupled with insufficient blood supply to the brain, when he was sent here, he was already in severe shock and convulsions. His breathing and heartbeat are very weak. We don't know how he'll be at the moment, but when Dr. Qin was in another operating room, the director had already sent Dr. Chen and Dr. Su in." Qin Siding didn't say more. He took a look at Mo Jingshan and knew the seriousness of the matter from his expression. He turned to make a call, applied for permission from the director of the emergency room, and went straight into the emergency room. Qin Siding and the other two doctors walked out. Qin Siding did not say anything. When Mo Jingshan looked at him, he nodded at him and turned to change his clothes. Dr. Su walked out to say, "Mr. Mo, our hospital has Mrs. Mo's past medical records. Earlier, during the emergency treatment, we took some time to check." Dr. Su walked out and said, "Mr. Mo, Mrs. Mo's past medical records are all available in our hospital. Just now, during the emergency treatment, we took some time to check. Mrs. Mo has a cold uterus and just experienced a traumatic abortion a few months ago. Her physical condition has always been very weak, and it seems like she hasn't had much time to recuperate. Her high fever in itself is very dangerous, and she was also soaked in cold water for a long period of time. When she was sent to the hospital, her convulsions were really very dangerous. Luckily, Dr. Qin has a good understanding of all aspects of her condition. With Dr. Qin's participation, our emergency measures were very successful. Currently, her fever has already subsided, and her limbs are no longer cramping and convulsing. However, it's already dark now. It's best if someone stays in her room at night to prevent another high fever or other situations." At this moment, Jinwan had already been pushed out. Mo Jingshan's gaze landed on Jinwan, who was still deep asleep on the bed. Dr. Su did not say more. He turned back to speak with Qin Siding for a while and nodded at him. He then had the nurses move Jinwan to her room. In the room, Auntie Chin rushed to the hospital to take care of her after receiving the news. It was not until midnight that Auntie Chin went to the nurses' break room to sleep. Mo Jingshan stood by the window, his back facing everything in the room. He stood tall and cold, as though he was aloof from the world. No one knew what he was thinking about. This was the scene Qin Siding saw when he pushed open the door. He walked in. Jinwan is fine. Although she has a high fever, it didn't develop into pneumonia. This means that her physical condition is not bad. It's just that she's afraid of the cold. After all, it's an old problem. Although her condition was critical when she was sent to the emergency room, compared to when you were sent to the hospital in Los Angeles covered in blood, this is nothing. Even you can endure it. She won't have any problems. Don't worry too much. Qin Siding's voice broke the deathly silence. The man by the window remained silent. Seeing that Jinwan was still sleeping, Qin Siding walked over to pick up the thermometer to test her temperature. After seeing that she did not have a fever after being resuscitated, he placed the thermometer back into the pocket of his white coat and turned to look at the man standing by the window. Ever since you came back from America, you haven't had a single normal day. We've been brothers for so many years, but I really can't understand it. You clearly love Jinwan to an extent that no one can compare to, yet you insist on pushing her so far away. It wasn't easy for you to come back from the gates of hell. Can't you just live a normal life? Why must you get a divorce? Must you torture a good relationship to such a state? Qin Siding glanced at Jinwan as he spoke. He saw that her eyes were tightly shut. She had really been sleeping and could not hear their conversation. His heart softly sighed. What does it matter if I really love her to an extent that no one can compare to? Mo Jingshan's voice was very mild, and the indifferent curve of his lips was almost invisible. His eyes were calm and indifferent, as though the person who carried Jinwan into the ambulance during the day was not him. The large room in the ward became cold and silent because of his voice. Chapter 4:15. Qin Siding could feel the bone-chilling coldness from his words. He turned to look at him. Others might not understand, but how could Jinwan not understand? She persevered for so long because she didn't believe that you would be heartless just because you said so. How could she believe that you wouldn't love her just because you said so? Mo Jingshan turned to look at the woman lying on the bed whose face was pale as though she did not have any breath of life. Towards her, it does take some effort. So, step by step, you bullied her until she became like this. Mo Jingshan only listened and did not respond. Qin Siding suddenly thought of something. What did you say to her? After so long, I saw that she was still lively and lively. No matter what she did, at least she had a goal. Why did she suddenly become so depressed in one night? Mo Jingshan looked out of the window expressionlessly. There was no reply. Because he said that Mo Jingshan was already dead. Was he really dead? The ward was very large, spacious, empty, and silent. The silence made one panic. Jinwan fainted for 2 days and slept in the hospital for another 2 days. However, she was not completely asleep. She would wake up occasionally, but the time she woke up was relatively short. Not long after opening her eyes, she would fall asleep again. Finally, on the 3rd morning, when she woke up, she walked out of her muddle-headed state. However, her throat was so sore that it felt as though it was filled with sand. When she opened her eyes, she saw Auntie Chin, Xia Tian, and Xiao Ba were all in the ward. It was the same as when she slept and woke up. At that time, she seemed to have seen Auntie Chin, who was a servant of the Ji family. It turned out that in the few days she slept, everyone she was familiar with had come to the hospital. "You're awake." Xia Tian was still talking to Xiao Ba when she suddenly noticed that Jin Wan's eyes were half open. She immediately reached out to touch her head. "How long do you plan to stay awake this time? Are you going to continue sleeping? You didn't have a fever these 2 days. Don't tell me you're going to sleep for so long." Jin Wan did not close her eyes. She quietly watched her for a long time. Xia Tian waved her hand in front of her eyes. "Hey, my ancestor, don't sleep too much these 2 days. Dr. Chin said that you only had a high fever. It can't be that bad, right?" Jin Wan closed her eyes again and then opened them again, saying hoarsely, "Stop shaking. If you keep shaking, I'll really fall asleep again." Hearing Jin Wan's words, Xiao Ba and Auntie Chin rushed over from the side. "You're awake. Are you really awake?" Jin Wan looked at them and then at Xia Tian. She had no recollection of how she ended up in the hospital again. However, when she heard Xia Tian mention Dr. Chin, she roughly knew something. She just did not ask. She only remembered that she had taken a shower in the hotel. Chapter 4:16. It's a document sent from MO Corporation 2 months ago. I didn't open it. Back then, you were the one who helped me sign for it. You even asked what it was. You should have some impression of it. Oh, I remember now. I'll go look for it." After hanging up, Jin Wan calmly looked at the darkened screen of her phone. A moment later, Jin Wan called someone else. "I've agreed to the plan to expand the studio to London. I'll personally go to London to sign the contract." After making all the arrangements, Jin Wan slept for a long time. She slept for more than 24 hours. Auntie Chin was so frightened that she rushed to call Dr. Chin over. In the end, Chin Sighting examined Jin Wan and rolled his eyes. "I thought something had happened. It's just a nap. What's there to be nervous about? But Madam woke up yesterday. When she woke up, she seemed fine. Why did she sleep for so long? It's just a deep sleep. She'll wake up on her own when she wants to." Chin Sighting retracted his stethoscope and glanced at Jin Wan on the bed before turning to leave. Seeing that Dr. Chin had already said so, Auntie Chin could only wait by the bedside. Xia Tian and Xiao Ba returned to the studio after a busy day. That night, Jin Wan finally woke up. Just as Chin Sighting said, she only slept for a little longer than usual. However, when she woke up, her mental state seemed much better. The moment Jin Wan opened her eyes, she saw the sunset glow on the horizon. The window was open, and the air was clean and cool. She held on to the edge of the bed and slowly sat up. "Boss, you're awake." The moment Xiao Ba entered, she saw Jin Wan sitting up on the bed. She rushed over to point at the document by her bedside. "Is this what you were talking about yesterday?" Jin Wan turned to look at it. "Yes." "What's in it?" "This package has been sent to you for a long time, hasn't it?" "When I dug it out yesterday, I found that it hadn't been opened," Xiao Ba said as she opened the thermos flask with Auntie Chin, intending to let Jin Wan eat something. "Did you bring a pen?" Jin Wan asked. Xiao Ba rummaged through her bag and found a ball pen. "Yes, but boss, what do you need a pen for?" "Put it down. You guys go out first." Auntie Chin and Xiao Ba looked at each other. Xia Tian was not in the ward now, so they didn't have much idea. Seeing that Jin Wan seemed to be fine, they put down the vacuum flask and turned to go out. They closed the door of the ward from the outside. Jinwan pushed aside the blankets and got off the bed. She picked up the package on the bedside table and tore open the seal. She took out the A4 paper inside. On the first page, the words, "divorce agreement," were written clearly and glaringly. She only glanced at the first 4 words and did not look at the contents of the other pages. She turned to the last page, opened the pen that little Aid had placed there, and wrote her name in the female signature column. There were 2 copies of the divorce agreement. When Jinwan picked up the second copy to sign, Xia Tian pushed the door open and came in. Seeing the word "divorce" from afar, Xia Tian's eyelids twitched. She abruptly rushed forward but was still a step too late. Jinwan placed the signed agreement back into the paper bag and resealed it. "Are you crazy?" Xia Tian asked in disbelief. "Send it back for me tomorrow," Jinwan said calmly. Xia Tian rushed to press down on the paper bag by her hand. She turned to look at Jinwan's calm expression. Who was the one who said that she would never divorce Mo Jingshan in this lifetime? What's with this divorce agreement? Why did you sign it? When did you print the divorce agreement? Why do you want a divorce? Jinwan looked at her. The divorce agreement was sent to me by Mo Jingshan some time ago. Xia Tian's expression faltered. As though she understood something from Jinwan's gaze and tone, she slowly moved her hand away from the paper bag. After a long moment, she said, "You've been quiet all this time. Is this what you've been holding back on?" Jinwan did not answer. She only said, "I've agreed to Mr. Zan's suggestion. I'm preparing to go to England. Do you and Xiao Ba want to go with me?" Xia Tian's breath was stuck in her throat. "Let's not talk about your divorce first. But now that the studio has developed to this stage and has just moved to a new location, even if you want more and better opportunities, you can work with BGY or WK. Why must you go so far away to England? Mr. Zand is famous in England's financial world for his devilish hands. He can indeed help you, but if you work with him, you won't be able to return home for a long time. Are you sure you want to give up on these?" Jinwan calmly curved her lips. "Because if I go to London, I'll be able to earn more from Mr. Zand's side. After all, BGY and WK haven't brought in any foreign investors yet. I'm taking a step ahead now. By the time WK and BGY's performance soars in the country, our studio will have already soared and developed even faster than them. Who said that my goal is only a small studio? Who said that I can only rely on the resources of various large property companies in the country to survive? We can clearly do better than them, can't we?" Xia Tian choked. She understood Jinwan too well. At this moment, all she could say was, "Must you leave? Is there any reason why I must stay in High City?" Jinwan asked. "Nonsense. It's not like you can't live without a man. You still have me. There's also the G family. There are so many people. It's not like I won't return. It's just that a Sino-foreign joint venture needs some time to grow. Coincidentally, I still need you to stay behind to help me oversee the studio in High City. If Xiao Ba is willing to leave with me, let her come with me. She can also train. What about Mo Jingshan? Divorce is only a legal formality. Can you really let go of him? Can you really forget him? Of course. He's already dead. What's there to be unable to let go of?" 2 days later, MO Corporation suddenly received a package from the same city. The sender was Jinwan, and the recipient was Mo Jingshan. Because Mo Jingshan had gone to a nearby city last night and would only be able to rush back this afternoon, Shenmu went to receive the package. Due to his work habits, all packages that appeared in the company had to be checked by Shenmu first before being delivered to Mo Jingshan. Thus, Shenmue did not hesitate to open the package. After reading the contents of the package, Shenmue was stunned. He rushed to give Jean-Wan a call, attempting to find some clues from her words. However, she did not have the slightest intention to deny it. Jean-Wan's counterattack was swift and merciless. The person she attacked was unable to retaliate at all. Even when Mo Jingshan returned to the company before the sky turned dark, Shenmue had yet to get off work. He brought the package into his office. CEO Mo, this is something that Mrs. Mo sent over. Shenmue weighed his tone. It's 2 copies of her signed divorce papers. Chapter 4:17. Seeing his boss's reaction, Shenmue didn't dare to speak at this moment. He hesitated before asking, well, should I leave it here or just ignore it and send it back? Mo Jingshan looked at the 2 agreements in his hand and threw the pen on the table. Put it down. Go out first. Shenmue had to walk to the desk and put down the agreement. Then, not daring to look at CEO Mo's face again, he quickly slipped out. The office was empty and quiet. Mo Jingshan picked up the divorce agreement on the table and glanced at it. Jean-Wan's handwriting was very beautiful. It was not the regular hairpin-style small regular script. The slightly connected strokes were elegant and a bit free and easy. It could be seen that she did not hesitate at all when she wrote. Every stroke was very smooth. When Mo Jingshan received the divorce agreement, Jean-Wan had been discharged from the hospital. That night, Mo Jingshan returned to the Yugarden villa. The servants in the villa were all there, including Auntie Chin, but Jean-Wan was nowhere to be seen. From 7:00 p.m. to midnight, Jean-Wan did not come back. Although she had agreed to the divorce agreement was made by the company's legal department. Now, because she had suddenly returned the investment, several parts of the agreement needed to be changed. In addition to the funds allocated to her studio, the $200 million that had been invested in her studio should also belong to her. After he took over Shine, many companies related to real estate under the Mo Corporation in High City would also be transferred to her name. Jean-Wan might have signed the agreement without reading it. Although he was the one who made the divorce happen, he could not let her suffer losses in the future. Auntie Chin urged him to go back to his room to rest several times. Mr. Mo, when I accompanied Madam out of the hospital, she asked us to come back and help her pack up all her clothes and put them in her suitcase. She will send someone to pick them up in a few days. Auntie Chin sighed. And Madam also said that she probably won't come back to the Yugarden. Mo Jingshan seemed not to hear her and still took a nap on the sofa in the hall on the first floor of the Yugarden. At 1:00 in the morning, his cell phone suddenly vibrated. It was a call from Jean-Wan. Mo Jingshan did not sleep much. He leaned against the sofa and picked up the phone. Jean-Wan was probably standing outside. It was very windy in High City tonight. The wind whistled into his ears from the other side of the phone, sending chills down his spine. The night was as cold as water. It was as cold as her voice. Mo Jingshan, I'm not returning to the Yugarden. You don't have to wait for me. Sleep early. Mo Jingshan subconsciously sat up on the sofa, asking in a heavy voice, are you not coming back today, or never? Jean-Wan chuckled, her voice calm. I've even asked Auntie Chin to pack up my clothes. Isn't the answer obvious? You know, I'm a person who either doesn't let go, or once I do, I'll never look back. Mo Jingshan did not speak for a moment. He didn't get to ask her about her plans after the divorce. Whether it was a merciless dagger or an unnecessary concern, she blocked all of them before they could be unsheathed. Jean-Wan was indeed such a person. When she was persistent, she had the courage to cut off all means of retreat. But when she completely gave up, she learned his decisiveness. She knew how to strike first and leave first. That was good too. At least he had taught her something. Mo Jingshan was silent for a long time and finally said, "That's good too. I still have things to do, so I can't talk to you anymore. Mo Jingshan, let's go our separate ways." Jin Wan said and was about to hang up. Before she hung up, Mo Jingshan said, "The divorce agreement needs to be amended. When you come back and sign it again, you can talk to me about going our separate ways." The woman's voice on the other end of the phone was very light. "I don't want anything. I've caused you so much trouble in the past. Now that it's time to say goodbye, I have to pay you back. I've already paid back all your investments. As for the rest, thank you for laying the foundation for me. In the future, I'll be working alone. Time is as precious as money to me, so if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead. Mo Jingshan, your studio is already doing very well. You don't have to work too hard." Jin Wan did not speak for a moment and paused. He heard her breathing on the other end of the phone. It was very light and very low, mixed with the sound of the cool wind. "Mo Jingshan, I know you're still you. You'll always be you." From the beginning, she clearly knew that he would always be him. Even if he knew about her embarrassing past 10 years, he never left, nor did he die in that car accident. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment before lightly spitting out 2 words, "Is that so?" Jin Wan said in a voice as soft as when she was by his side, "It's late. I won't disturb you anymore. Goodbye." Mo Jingshan, "All right." The phone was immediately hung up. Everything was quiet. The day after Jin Wan sent the signed divorce agreement to Mo Jingshan, the Yu Garden was closed, no one could enter, and all the servants were dismissed overnight. Auntie Chin received a large sum of money. She was an old servant of the Mo family. Logically speaking, after leaving the Yu Garden, she should directly return to the Mo family, but she really felt guilty to grandfather Mo. She was afraid that he would be too shocked to face the news of their divorce. Moreover, because Mr. Mo did not intend to let her return to the Mo family, she planned to return to her hometown. Before returning to her hometown, Auntie Chin went to Mo Nwan's studio. At that time, Jin Wan was in a meeting with the people from England. After the meeting, she saw Auntie Chin waiting outside. Jin Wan personally received Auntie Chin, but Auntie Chin did not even sit down or drink tea. She just looked at Jin Wan, who was dressed in a professional suit and had a ruddy complexion as if she had not been hurt at all. After looking at her for a long time, she said, "Mr. Mo has closed the Yu Garden. Now no one can enter." "I know. I heard." Auntie Chin originally thought she just came to see Jin Wan. After all, after returning to her hometown, she did not know if she would have a chance to see her again. However, seeing Jin Wan's calm expression, her eyes immediately turned red. "That night, after you spoke to Mr. Mo on the phone, Mr. Mo directly smashed the phone." Jin Wan did not speak. That night, none of us dared to go out of the room, but no one could sleep, because Mr. Mo smashed everything that could be seen in the Yu Garden. The next day, he ordered people to clean up the mess on the ground. The entire Yu Garden was empty, and there was nothing left. Jin Wan's face was expressionless. She gently blew on the tea in the cup and still did not respond. "Mrs. Mo." She didn't know how long she had been drunk or how long she had slept. Halfway through, Jin Wan received Xia Tian's call. When Xia Tian heard that she was drinking, she asked where she was and didn't call her again, considerately giving her some time to be alone. After waking up, she continued to drink. Jin Wan didn't eat anything and relied on wine to survive. When she couldn't drink any more and felt sick to the point of vomiting, she finally threw the wine into the garbage bag and lay on the bed to sleep. When she finally woke up completely, it was the morning of the third day. Jean-Wan opened her eyes and looked at the fluttering curtains and the sun hanging high in the east outside the window. She got up, walked to the balcony, and looked downstairs at everyone who got up early in the morning to rush to work. She looked at all kinds of people in the world. After staring at it for a long time, she came to her senses and returned to her room. She threw all the bottles of wine out of the room and went to take a shower. She brushed her teeth and washed herself from head to toe. After the smell of the wine had disappeared, she changed into clean and comfortable clothes and walked out. After carrying her bag and leaving the hotel, she passed by a hair salon. Jean-Wan entered and cut her waist-length hair into a shoulder-length, medium-short haircut. As she left the salon, Jean-Wan tossed her hair and recalled what Feng Ling had said. After cutting her hair short, it was indeed very comfortable. She didn't care about the 3,000 strands of worry. What was important was that it was really relaxing. She went to a nearby vegetarian restaurant to have a full breakfast and then returned to the studio to resume her normal work and life. A week later, Mr. Zan specially came from England to discuss the joint venture. Mr. Vince of BGY Group was still interested in her and hoped to persuade her to give up the idea of going to England. However, Jean-Wan still signed a contract with England. Once it was signed, she would probably develop in England for 2 to 3 years after leaving Haiqing. Xia Tian would temporarily take over as the person in charge of Mo Nwan's studio. However, Xia Tian insisted that she was only managing. If Jean-Wan dared to not return after 3 years, she would directly take the people from the finance department and leave. At that time, not only would she lose the studio, but her best friend would also run away. She wanted to see where she could go to cry in the future. Anyway, Xia Tian did indeed threaten her like this. After that, there were various preparations for staying in England for a long time. In the end, only Xiao Ba and a few interns who hoped to receive various work training opportunities decided to follow Jean-Wan to England. Xia Tian would bring a group of veterans from the studio to oversee Mo Nwan's studio in Haiqing. All these arrangements were settled. These 3 years, you really don't plan on coming back? The day before they left for England, the group of colleagues in the studio gathered for another meal. Jean-Wan was on her period tonight, so she did not drink. Xia Tian asked for a hot water bag from someone in the restaurant and handed it to her. She then watched as Jean-Wan pressed the hot water bag against her stomach and sat by her side. She casually asked, "If Mr. Zand is willing to let me return, I will definitely come back. However, if the development there is too busy every day and I really can't leave, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to return," Jean-Wan said. "You're leaving tomorrow. Even now, you don't plan on meeting Mo Jingshan to say goodbye." "There's nothing to say goodbye to." Jean-Wan's expression was calm and indifferent. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. After signing the divorce agreement, Jean-Wan did not see Mo Jingshan again. Indeed, there was no need to see him. She only vaguely heard that Shine Group was about to make a big move. Mo Xiaozi frequently traveled between Haiqing and Los Angeles. The Western financial world and the Chinese business world were all discussing whether Shine was really going to change owners. They wondered if Mo Jingshan, who was already a dark horse in the country, was going to take over Shine Group. Chapter 419. Jean-Wan bought an apartment of more than 200 square meters near the studio building and placed all her belongings in it. After all, there were too many clothes and various items. She couldn't bring so many things with her. It was already late. After Jean-Wan packed her luggage, she sat on the carpet and looked at the blue diamond in her hand. It was as though she could still remember every time Mo Jingshan held her hand, the occasional pause when his slender knuckles stroked her ring finger. He had never placed any restrictions on her. He didn't even force her to wear a wedding ring. However, he had always helped her find the best things in the world. For example, this blue diamond. Whether it was made into a precious blue diamond pendant or a blue diamond ring, it was the most precious piece of jewelry in the world. He chose a blue diamond for her and left it up to her to decide what to do with it and how to make it. Just like now, they had let go of each other. He gave her a free world and let her create her future life as she pleased. He would no longer participate in it. Jean Wan put the blue diamond back into the velvet box and left the box in this apartment without taking it with her. The second week after Jean Wan left for England, she heard that Mo Jingshan had also left High City for Los Angeles. Jean Wan never saw him again, nor did she contact him again. For a long period of time, because the people around her had little contact with America and High City, she did not hear any news about Mo Jingshan. She also did not take the initiative to investigate or ask about him. However, later, she heard that Mo Shaozi was struck down by pressure from various Chinese enterprises and that Shine Group's stock market almost collapsed. Several months later, America's Shine Group's new CEO took over. At that time, Jean Wan was busy with the joint venture in London. Every day, she was tortured by Mr. Zhan's business methods and often worked late at night. She did not even have time to rest and did not have the energy to care about other things. From the very beginning, High City's Mo Wan studio had taken the right path because it had identified the domestic business opportunities and had been developing well. In this way, the various funds obtained from the studio could support Jean Wan's partner company. Mr. Zhan was also a very shrewd financier and businessman. He taught Jean Wan how to use these funds to pave the way step by step. After staying in England for a year, Jean Wan was doing very well. The company was successfully established, and Mr. Zhan felt that her Mo Wan studio could become the main business target of the company. Thus, the company name could not be changed. However, Jean Wan still removed the two words Mo Wan. In the end, the entire company was officially registered and changed to MN. After that, because the company set its sights on the internet industry, real estate industry, technology research and development industry, and mobile software development industry, these were all booming industries, it had more and more subsidiaries under its name. In the end, under the unstoppable trend, the MN Group was established. Mr. Zhan had many companies under his name that he had single-handedly supported. Thus, from the very beginning, it was agreed that on the day the company was formed, 49% of the shares would belong to Mr. Zhan. People like him who only relied on their brains to make a living had too many shares in their hands. He was also a shareholder of too many companies. Jean Wan was also very impressed by such a person. Mr. Zhan was already over 40 years old. Thus, from the very beginning, she had treated him as her teacher. Originally, they had agreed that 51% of the shares would belong to him. However, in the end, Mr. Zhan gave Jean Wan 2% and returned her the status of a shareholder. He held on to 49% of the shares and became a carefree immortal who had nothing to do and was waiting for money. With the status of a shareholder in Jean Wan's hands, she was naturally the one in charge of MN. All the responsibilities were placed on her. With the greatest responsibility, the greatest pressure, and the greater the motivation. Jean Wan's life became busier and busier. She was so busy that she could barely take care of herself. Furthermore, the company's development was not as smooth as it had initially been. In recent years, the momentum of the domestic and foreign real estate development industry and the mobile software industry was too strong. At the same time, there were too many similar products competing with each other. No matter how capable Jean Wan was, there would always be a day when someone would snatch her away. For example, the company had just invested several hundred million yuan to develop a few pieces of software to deal with the market. However, not long after it was developed, it would be imitated by others. Furthermore, the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. There would always be people trying to hinder MN Group's development. Even though the products were listed at the same time, those that belonged to MN Group would not be approved immediately, causing all the money invested to go down the drain. London was a place with heavy humidity all year round. When Jean Wan first arrived, she would have rashes all over her body. Her body that was afraid of cold and wet suffered a lot in the first half of the year. Later, in order to avoid skin inflammation, which she didn't know was caused by acclimatization or her delicate body, she began to give up on all short-sleeved clothes. Every day, she would either wear long sleeves or long skirts. She also tried to walk outdoors as little as possible. This way, the rashes on her body and face gradually improved. It was precisely because she dressed like this every day that her originally fair skin became even fairer and more tender. In the eyes of many tall British men, she was indescribably beautiful. Jean Wan had many suitors. Xiao Ba, who had always been by Jean Wan's side, completely understood Jean Wan's temper and had helped her reject many of them. Occasionally, when she encountered some difficult suitors, Jean Wan would personally deal with them. She would often display her true colors and make the other party speechless. By the second year in London, the originally thriving MN Group had fallen into an unprecedented financial impasse. Mr. Zand had accompanied her to pave the way for the early stage and was now busy advising other companies. He couldn't spare any attention to help Jean Wan. Furthermore, he believed that Jean Wan was capable enough to tide through the difficulties and didn't need to rely on others' help. After that, MN Group staggered through a year-long financial crisis. However, it was temporarily overshadowed by many companies who had finally seen a business opportunity and completely copied their company's business model. The money they earned in the first year was greatly lost in the second year. At the end of the year, the little money they had left was completely emptied. In the short 2 years after the divorce, Jean Wan had tasted the taste of success, but she had also suffered the taste of failure. Chapter 420. Jean Wan's MN Group fell into a financial crisis, but Shine Group in the United States was saved by Imo Jingshan's shrewd decision, and Shine Group flourished in Imo Jingshan's hands. In the past 2 years, Jean Wan had been in good health. Her complexion had become ruddy, and her overall health index had been rising. However, in the past 6 months, she had lost a lot of weight because of the financial crisis and all kinds of pressure. She didn't eat on time, but lived a regular life that even she found incredible. But she was under too much pressure and had too many things to do. Even if she often slept to catch up on sleep when she was not busy, the pressure of day after day still hovered over her head. Carrying a multinational group was not as simple as carrying a small studio. The studio could be sold at any time and announced its closure at any time, but a large multinational group was involved in many aspects, and everything was not so easy. In the office building of MN Group in London, many employees had been laid off. The company building, which had been lively last year, was especially deserted this year, but it was precisely because of this that the people who stayed were very busy. Once they were busy, they had no time to be sentimental about the departure of their old friends. Only Jean Wan occasionally stared at the empty seats in a daze after the meeting. Those empty seats were the directors and managers of several departments who had resigned and left because they no longer thought highly of MN Group. This was the reality of society. When you won, others would crowd around you, but when you looked like you were about to lose, some people would decisively leave before everything became a foregone conclusion. Their gazes would also quickly turn elsewhere, no longer as eager as they used to be. On the left side of the conference room was a huge circular floor-to-ceiling window, facing the direction of China. From afar, across the mountains and rivers of the earth, it seemed that the blooming flowers of High City at this time could be seen. Sometimes when Jean Wan returned from work and lived in the same apartment as Xiao Ba, she would always go over to see Xiao Ba and Xia Tian's video chat, but she didn't take the initiative to send a video chat. What on earth had changed in 2 years? A year ago, things like Weibo became popular in the country, and the number of communication software on mobile phones increased day by day. Some of the software was first developed by MN Company, but in the end, it was copied by others, and after a simple modification, it became the most popular and popular software. Jean Wan sat in the condo, looking at the day and calculating the time, and suddenly smiled. Time really flies. In a few months, even WeChat will be released. An era was coming, and an era was silently being suppressed. Little by little, time seemed to overlap with the world she once lived in. Everything seemed to have returned to its original point. The only difference was the difference of 10 years and 2 years. The other difference was that she was no longer the homeless Jean Wan who had lost everything. But what did she have now? The Ji family didn't go bankrupt, and Ji Hongwen was still living peacefully, but since she learned about her birth, she still kept in touch with her family, but she still remembered many rules that she shouldn't break, so she didn't even know where her home was. The studio was now officially under the name of MN Group, and Xia Tian was in charge of it in High City. Jean Wan didn't want to go back and disturb Xia Tian's life, nor did she want to put a lot of pressure on the company in High City, so as long as she had flexible funds, she would give priority to the studio. There was no blood relationship with the Ji family, so she had no real family. Her friends were thousands of miles away from her, and her marriage had ended 2 years ago. Everything was as Mo Jingshan said when he woke up in Los Angeles after sleeping for 2 months. The trajectory of life shouldn't be reversed, and everything should return to its original point. Xiao Ba had a boyfriend in the company. He was a foreign student. Although he was 1 year younger than Xiao Ba, he was very manly and reliable. The two of them loved each other and began to live together after a few months. Jean Wan gave up her previous apartment to them and moved to a smaller apartment near the company for the time being. She had a villa in England. When she first came here, Mr. Zand arranged a place for her to live, but it was too far from the company. She only went back to live a few times and didn't go back. The apartment she used to live in with Xiao Ba was also near the company. Now that she came out to live alone, she was closer to the company. Now that Jean Wan lived alone, she rarely went out to eat, and rarely ordered takeout. She often passed by the supermarket below the apartment to buy vegetables and various ingredients. The owner of the supermarket was a Chinese woman, which made her feel as though she wasn't abroad and slightly felt like she had returned home. People here were used to buying groceries by credit card. Once, Jean Wan saw a tall man holding his wife in his arms and buying very few things in the supermarket, but when he took out a black card and handed it to the boss of the supermarket, she stood there and stared blankly at him. From then on, Jean Wan found that she could always see the loving foreign couple shopping. Later, she deliberately avoided meeting them so that she wouldn't be dazed for a moment every time. What was there to be dazed about? She hadn't heard any news about Mo Jingshan for a long time. It was as though he had completely disappeared from her world. There was no trace of him. When she heard news about Mo Jingshan again, it was about a new international achievement of the American Shine Group. The internet industry was popular both at home and abroad, and a new industry was developed and led by Shine Group. Companies all over the world who had worked with Shine Group congratulated them. Although MN Group and Shine Group didn't have much contact, some of their partners were related. From the perspective of a fellow Chinese company, or from the perspective of an old acquaintance, perhaps Jean Wan should congratulate them, but she also knew that such an achievement wasn't surprising to him at all. In the future, Shine Group would have countless epic achievements, all of which were made possible by Mo Jingshan after he took over Shine. She usually calmly restrained her emotions, but occasionally had to drink at social events. After getting drunk, she couldn't help thinking, what was Mo Jingshan doing now? Would he be annoyed or even annoyed by the increasingly frequent fawning on Shine Group? Was everything going well in his life? Chapter 421. She would think a lot and wonder if Mo Jingshan's cold and noble character would make Shine's partners uncomfortable. But no matter how she thought about it, she felt that she was worrying for nothing. She didn't even have time to worry about her own business, and now she had to worry about other people's business. Just by looking at Shine's glory in the past few years, she knew how simple it was in Mo Jingshan's hands. He was not like her, facing countless crises and risks. She didn't even know if MN Group could survive in her hands. When a person was not strong enough, he needed to be as smooth as her. If he was strong enough, he would be like Mo Jingshan. The only ones who needed to be smooth and slick were his subordinates, not him. Shine Group gradually became a legend among Chinese companies. On the other side, no matter how hard Jin Wan worked, MN Group was suppressed too much by its peers and failed to qualify for the Chinese company selection at the end of the year. She heard that people from Shine Group would come to participate in the selection conference this time. She didn't know who they were, but Jin Wan was not qualified to go. The end of the second year was spent in all kinds of failures. Now it was the beginning of another year, and Jin Wan started working like crazy. She was often busy in the company and personally participated in all the projects and departments. This year was the third year since MN Group was established in the UK. She couldn't lose, and she had to win. This time, she had learned a lesson from her previous mistakes. She kept all her new projects under wraps until the day they hit the market. She didn't expose all the explosive points, bit by bit. Not only did she attract the attention of consumers, but she also made it difficult for her competitors, who were eyeing her covetously, to see through her plans and projects. Even if they wanted to imitate her, they had to wait until her projects became popular. Otherwise, not only would they not be able to suppress the momentum of the MN Group, but they would also be rejected by the public. What was worth celebrating was that Jin Wan's path became more and more careful and steady. She hit all the initial sharpness and achieved great success. This year's spring had just passed, and MN Group received the Innovation Award from the Overseas Business Summit and investment funds from various parties. Regaining confidence, all the plans that had been put aside last year began to be carried out. In half a year, Jin Wan, as expected, recovered everything she had lost last year. Jin Wan focused on the development of MN Group this year. She didn't want to lose, so she asked all her employees to work hard together. Even Xiao Ba didn't have time to fall in love and stayed with Jin Wan in the company all day. Mr. Zand saw that Jin Wan actually had the ability to start from zero in the face of such pressure and difficulties. Seeing her current achievements, he happily invested the hundreds of millions of yuan he had earned from her in the first year into the company. He did not participate in the shares, and the shareholders still belonged to Jin Wan. This old fox invested money when it was profitable, and when it was losing, he withdrew his net. Now that he saw that MN Group was thriving, he came to invest again. But facing this old fox who had been in the financial world for many years, even though Jin Wan had seen through his tricks, she didn't refuse. After all, what she lacked now was investment. She didn't lose anything by dealing with this old fox. Instead, she learned more. In this third year, Jin Wan kept fighting for all the investments and opportunities. She was busy every day, and sometimes she was so busy that she didn't even have time to wash her hair. Several times, she wanted to cut her hair as short as Feng Ling's but was stopped by Xiao Ba. Time passed bit by bit, and Jin Wan's company grew little by little with her. Finally, in the third year after Jin Wan left High City, MN Group entered the top 10 Chinese enterprises in the world like a hot knife through butter. MN Group took over several of the most profitable industries, and every time, it was able to find the right business opportunity. It gradually began to do charity work, and the charity foundation under the name of MN Group also grew stronger day by day. 3 years after her divorce, Jean Wan entered the Forbes list as the world's highest-earning Chinese female entrepreneur under the age of 25. She immediately took the top spot. This year, Jean Wan stood at the peak of her career. When she saw Jean Wan's ranking on the Forbes list of female entrepreneurs, Xia Tian, who had been calm about Jean Wan's experiences over the years, called to congratulate her, and then asked her again and again when she planned to return to High City. Xia Tian made full use of her eloquence and talked to Jean Wan on the phone for an hour. She concluded that MN Group was now stable, and she could return to High City. After all, her home was in High City, and she could move the headquarters of MN Group back at any time. Many Chinese enterprises started their business abroad and then moved their headquarters back to China. This was not difficult, and it was up to Jean Wan when she decided to do it. Xiao Ba was more casual. She had worked hard with Jean Wan for several years and would go wherever Jean Wan was. In the end, Jean Wan just said she would think about it and didn't continue the topic. Jean Wan heard 3 pieces of news recently. One piece of news was that Shu Yan had actually gotten married half a year ago. She was married to a foreign entrepreneur. It was said that he was a man with the blood of 4 countries. After getting married, he lived in New York and had already quit all his jobs at Shine Group in Los Angeles. The other news was that major industries in China were about to be shaken. Chapter 422. On the international flight from London to High City, the cabin was closed, and all the passengers had boarded. The sunlight outside the window was too dazzling. Jean Wan put on her sunglasses, closed her eyes, and ignored the people in the other seats. However, there were only 2 people in the first-class cabin today. A man sitting on the other side didn't sit down until Jean Wan closed her eyes. The man was originally sitting on the other side, but when he caught a glimpse of Jean Wan, he immediately asked to change to the seat next to her. Now there were only the 2 of them in the first-class cabin, and the flight attendant certainly wouldn't refuse such a request. When the man sat down next to Jean Wan, he saw that she didn't like the sunlight, so he directly closed the small window. Jean Wan sensed something, opened her eyes, glanced to the side, and was about to close them again when she suddenly paused, took off the sunglasses on her face, and looked at the man sitting next to her. "Hi." The man greeted her. Jean Wan looked at him for a while and then said, "Shenmu." Shenmu smiled and held back the words Mrs. Imo that were on the tip of his tongue. He hesitated before saying, "Miss Ji, are you going back to China?" Jean Wan didn't expect to meet Shenmu in such a place, but she wasn't surprised. She just looked at him and said, "Yes, I'm going back." What a coincidence. "I went to London on a business trip a few days ago and was about to return today. I didn't expect to meet you here. Some time ago, I heard that MN Group was going to move its headquarters back to China, but I didn't hear much about it. I didn't expect it to be true." Jean Wan didn't speak, which was a tacit agreement. Shenmu had always been a man of few words, but perhaps because they hadn't seen each other for several years, he rarely spoke warmly as if they were old acquaintances. "Miss Ji, you've appeared in the news a lot these years. This year, you even made the Forbes list of female entrepreneurs. I didn't expect you to become so powerful in just a few years. In the past, many people didn't think highly of you when you were in the real estate industry, but now the real estate industry has been soaring, and your income is really amazing. This year, most of the companies in the real estate industry are winners. I have to say, Miss G, you really have foresight. As a young female representative of Chinese enterprises in the past 2 years, Jean Wan's name had already spread far and wide. Several flight attendants at the airport heard their conversation and couldn't help but look at her. On these foreign airlines, most of the flight attendants were young men. Those people looked at Jean Wan, only to see that Jean Wan did not move, as if she did not hear Shenmu's words. She just sat there quietly, listening, without any response, nor did she smile politely. She was clearly a very young woman, but she looked calm and peaceful, and in such silence, revealed a mature charm beyond her age. Even Shenmu found that Jean Wan had changed a lot in just a few years. Every pore on her body exuded an eye-catching temperament. She used to have an extraordinary reputation for her beauty in High City, and after years of honing and settling in the business world, she looked like she was born to be a socialite with the demeanor of a great family. However, Jean Wan just smiled at his words and then closed her eyes to rest. He didn't know if it was intentional or not, but she didn't say more to him, nor did she continue to respond to Shenmu. On the contrary, Shenmu still looked at Jean Wan from time to time, but Jean Wan treated him as if he was invisible and didn't respond. Even when they flew from England to China, Jean Wan didn't take the initiative to communicate with Shenmu. Shenmu felt a little wronged. It was CEO Mo who divorced her, not him. Although he had been working for CEO Mo, Miss G's completely indifferent attitude was really cold. The flight attendant reminded them that they would land in High City in half an hour. Shenmu tactfully returned to his original seat and sat down. Seeing that he didn't know when he would see Jean Wan again after getting off the plane, he thought about it and sat down next to her. "Will there be a car to pick you up after you get off the plane? If there isn't, do you need me to drive you back?" "My car is at the airport. I changed my flight at the last minute and haven't informed them." "I don't think there will be anyone to pick me up," Jean Wan replied and glanced at him. At the same time, she took a look at him. "Didn't you go to the United States to work for Shine these years? The MO Corporation has merged into the Shine Group's China branch. You're no longer working in High City. Why is your car at the airport?" "Miss G, don't you know?" Shenmu asked with a smile. Jean Wan glanced at him indifferently. "Know what? I've been back in China with CEO Mo for more than 4 months. Shine Group subsidiaries around the world are in a stable financial condition. After CEO Mo took over, he personally screened many of Shine's managers. Now, even the person in charge of the headquarters in Los Angeles came with CEO Mo. They're all trustworthy right-hand men, and CEO Mo doesn't need to worry about them at all. Now, the focus of global economic development and consumption is in China, and Shine is going to focus on China for the next 3 years." Mo Jingshan had returned to China. This didn't make her feel too much. It only took her a moment to suppress her slight surprise, but she didn't expect that Mo Jingshan had returned to China. "I went to London last week for a temporary assignment. My car is parked at the airport. If you don't have a car to pick you up, why don't you hitch a ride with me? Anyway, I'm going back to High City, and there's no one else in my car. It's not inconvenient. Nowadays, young, beautiful, and obviously rich girls like you had better not take a strange car. It's easy to get into trouble." Shenmu's following words faintly reached her ears. Jean Wan glanced at him and smiled, but still rejected him. "No, I happen to have a frequent customer here after I get off the plane. I'll take their car back. I won't bother you." Shenmu's words were suddenly stuck in his throat. He thought for a while and said, "CEO Mo may go to the company today. Don't you want to see him?" However, when he said this, the plane landed. There was a loud sound of the plane's wheels landing, the sound of the plane sliding on the flat ground, and a series of announcements in English and Chinese from the cabin announcing that the plane had landed safely. There were so many noises around that he didn't know whether Jean Wan heard it or not, but she put on her sunglasses again at this moment and didn't respond. The author's words. Chapter 423. The sound of the huge rollers landing on the ground, the sound of the plane gliding on the flat ground, and the announcement of the safe landing in English and Chinese came from the cabin. There were so many noises around that he didn't know whether Jean Wan heard it or not, but at this moment, she put on her sunglasses again and didn't reply. The cabin door opened, and Jean Wan got up and left, not looking back again. Shenmu hesitated and got up to follow her, but he didn't expect that Jean Wan really had a client to meet at the airport. As soon as she walked into the airport lobby, a man about 30 years old came up to her with a smile. Jean Wan waved at the man. When she turned to pick up her suitcase, she saw Shenmu standing a few steps behind her. However, she only glanced at him and politely nodded her head at him before turning to leave. Shenmu was about to raise his hand and say, "Then I'll see you another day." However, Jean Wan didn't even give him a chance to speak and left. Shenmu's hand froze in the air and then he put it down awkwardly. In the past, Miss G was quite easygoing. Every time she went to the MO Corporation, she would say hello and be very polite to him, which was a far cry from the attitude she had now when they were almost strangers. Seeing Jean Wan walking with the man in his 30s, who seemed to be talking and laughing, Shenmu couldn't help sighing and sighing. Without saying anything more, he walked out of the airport lobby. "A few days ago, I heard from CEO Xia that you were going to return to China. I thought it would take you at least a few months to prepare, but I didn't expect you to come back so soon." The man beside Jean Wan asked the secretary behind him to take her luggage, and then walked beside her, talking to her. "I didn't plan to come back so early. I'm used to it in the UK these years." Jean Wan smiled and said, "But Xia Tian is about to give birth. I can't still be carefree in the UK at this time. I have to come back and take over the business in High City, lest she can't even feel at ease when she gives birth." "Who said you lived a carefree life in the UK? People who don't know you only see the glory you have now, but how many people know what kind of life you have been living in the UK for the past 3 years?" Jean Wan smiled. "Everyone has to work hard. I haven't worked hard for a long time. If it weren't for you, Mr. Vince, who helped me deal with so many tricky contracts and resource disputes with various companies every time you were sent to the UK in the past 2 years, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to establish myself in this industry so quickly. Speaking of, I have a lot of benefactors. Mr. Zand, on one hand, Mr. Zand is my partner, and on the other hand, is my teacher. He has taught me a lot of business skills, and Mr. Vince, you are my benefactors." "What benefactors? Aren't you my confidant?" The man walking beside her glanced at her meaningfully. The secretary following behind Mr. Vince was no longer the same one from 3 years ago. She had long noticed that Mr. Vince had been deliberately applying to be sent to the UK in the past few years. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that every time Mr. Vince went to the UK, he would specially visit Jean Wan. However, although Jean Wan's relationship with Mr. Vince had gradually become closer, she seemed to have never seen Mr. Vince's repeated attempts to show goodwill. She only regarded him as a partner or friend, and for 3 years, she had never crossed the boundary of a friend. He really didn't know whether this Miss G's EQ was too low or she was too arrogant. How could she not be moved by him? Hearing the words confidant, Jean Wan just raised her eyebrows slightly, smiled, and looked at the weather outside the airport hall. The average temperature in High City in June is more than 30 degrees. I can feel the heat assaulting my face even before I walk out. Am I wearing too much? Mr. Vince didn't dwell on the topic just now. In the past few years, he had figured out Jean Wan's character. She devoted herself to her career and seemed to have almost disappeared. She was indifferent to things like men and relationships, but she didn't deliberately avoid them. It seemed that she was really not interested in them. Anyway, Jean Wan didn't have any troublesome suitors around her. Those who were too difficult to deal with had long been driven away by her. He didn't need to drive them away at all. He happened to be single for so many years and had long been used to getting along with Jean Wan like friends. She was not moved, and he was not in a hurry. The weather in London is too cold. It must have been a long time since you felt the sunshine in High City. You're indeed wearing too much. Do you want to change? I'll wait for you. Mr. Vince glanced at the long-sleeved blouse and jeans Jean Wan was wearing and turned back to signal his secretary to bring Jean Wan's suitcase over. Why don't you go first? I'll call a taxi and go back after changing. Today, I'm flying from London to High City, and you're flying from Hong Kong to High City. It's just a coincidence that we met at the airport. Just now, I heard from Secretary Yang that you arrived at the airport 3 hours ago. If I had known, I wouldn't have kept you waiting. I'd be too embarrassed to keep Mr. Vince waiting. Jean Wan said as she took off her sunglasses and put them in her bag. She carried her suitcase and looked around for a bathroom. I don't have anything to do in the company this afternoon. How long will it take to change? I'll wait for you. Mr. Vince stood in place and pointed to the right 200 meters away. Over there. Jean Wan looked in the direction he pointed. There was indeed a bathroom. She nodded politely to Mr. Vince with a smile, turned around, and pushed her suitcase in that direction. More than 10 minutes later, Jean Wan came out of the bathroom after changing her clothes. Her light striped blouse and jeans had been replaced by a bright red spaghetti strap dress. Her shoulder-length hair was casually bunched up behind her head, revealing her snow-white neck and collarbone. She looked cool, casual, and not deliberately seductive. After changing her clothes, she was about to call Xia Tian because Xiao Ba and the others had returned to High City a few days earlier. She was about to call Xia Tian to tell her that she was safe, but when she looked up, she saw that Mr. Vince was still standing there, waiting for her patiently. Mr. Vince saw Jean Wan change from a distance and gave her a smile of praise and appreciation. After Jean Wan walked in, the secretary behind him took Jean Wan's luggage. Many passers-by couldn't help glancing at the beauty in the red dress. It was not uncommon to see such a beautiful and fair-skinned beauty, but the temperament of this beauty in the red dress was particularly eye-catching. The kind of beauty that was beautiful but not arrogant, glamorous but not conceited, and completely unrestrained and composed made many men look at her. Even Secretary Yang couldn't help glancing at Jean Wan. No wonder Mr. Vince, who didn't want to marry, could fall for Miss G. Chapter 424. It had been a year since she left the airport and returned to downtown High City. Jean Wan looked at the familiar buildings on the roadside. She didn't expect that 3 years had passed so quickly, but nothing in High City seemed to have changed. It was as if she had never left. Are you sure you don't want me to send you back to your place? Mr. Vince sat in the car and looked at Jean Wan, who had been quietly looking out of the window. No, I'll go back to the company first. The new studio you moved to 3 years ago has become the old site. The new office building is not in the city center, but in the western part of the city, which is far away from where you used to live. Are you going to change your living place? Jean Wan did intend to move after coming back. She didn't answer but looked out of the window. After a while, she said, I'm not sure. I'll see. If you need anything, you can call me at any time. I've troubled you a lot when I was in London. Now that I'm back in High City, I have a lot of friends and relatives here. I'd better not trouble you, Mr. Vince. Now that I'm back, I just need to deal with some trifles. The rest will be handled by the people in the company. I don't need any help. Mr. Vince didn't insist. Seeing that Jean Wan was a little underdressed and the air conditioner in the car was too high, he sternly ordered, "Turn down the air conditioner." The secretary sitting in the front passenger seat hurriedly raised her hand and turned down half of the air conditioner. Jean Wan seemed not to hear it and acted as if it had nothing to do with her. She took a look at the time and said, "It will take at least 40 minutes to get to the West District from here. It's too far from your BGY company. I can get off here." "It's all right. I'll take you there first." Jean Wan couldn't persuade him, so she simply stopped talking, closed her eyes, leaned back in the seat, and no longer participated in any conversation. When they arrived at the West District, the Mercedes-Benz drove to the main entrance of the High City Company building of MN Group's China division. Mr. Vince was about to raise his hand to wake Jean Wan up, but the moment his hand touched her, Jean Wan had opened her eyes. The woman in the red dress had slept for 40 minutes, but the moment she opened her eyes, Mr. Vince could see that she hadn't slept at all. "Here we are." "Thank you." She was about to get out of the car when Mr. Vince suddenly held her hand and put a velvet box in it. Jean Wan silently looked at the velvet box in her hand and then at him. "What is this?" "Consider it a gift for your return to China." Jean Wan gave a faint smile but didn't even open it. She put the box back into his hand. "Thank you for welcoming me back, but I can't accept the gift. It's just a bracelet." Mr. Vince looked at her clean and fair wrist. "You haven't worn any jewelry these years. It's just a bracelet. It doesn't have any special meaning." "What, you don't dare to accept it? It's useless to goad me. If this was a shell bracelet that you bought from a seaside holiday, Mr. Vince, I might have accepted it as a souvenir. But this is too expensive, and I have no reason to accept it." She didn't need to open it at all. Just by looking at the small logo on the box, she knew it was a top jewelry brand in the world. Any piece of silver or crystal jewelry cost more than 100,000 yuan. Even though both of them were rich, she couldn't accept a simple gift. Seeing that Jean Wan was so determined, Mr. Vince didn't say more and put the box on the seat with a faint smile. "All right, I won't force you. If you don't like it, I won't give it to you again." Knowing Mr. Vince's feelings for her, Jean Wan usually wouldn't allow a man who had improper thoughts about her to stay with her for too long or become her friend. Just as Xia Tian said, she seemed to have changed a lot, but the arrogant and unapproachable personality of a teenager was still hidden in her bones. She didn't have any tolerance for men she didn't like. All pursuers were pushed away by her as if they were garbage, and she wouldn't give them a chance at all. But Mr. Vince was too considerate. He was too gentlemanly and respected her. He knew when to advance and when to retreat, and he never did anything to embarrass her. As time went by, this man had appeared for a long time, and he did help her several times in London, so she couldn't push him away. Friend? Sort of. At this moment, Jean Wan's cell phone rang. "Sorry, I have to take a call." Mr. Vince didn't speak. When Jean Wan answered the phone, he got out of the car and asked his secretary to bring her suitcase down. Then when he saw Jean Wan put down the phone after a few minutes, he opened the car door for her in a gentlemanly manner and said with a smile, "Miss G, please." Jean Wan put her cell phone back in her bag, nodded politely to Mr. Vince, and got out of the car, declining his request to send her back to the building. When their car drove away, Jean Wan walked into the office building with her suitcase. Although she hadn't been in High City for years, the security guards and staff at the gate recognized her as the president of the MN Group, so she walked unimpeded and no one dared to stop her. As soon as he entered, he saw two tall and fat men making a lot of noise at the front desk. They were smashing things and smashing cups. The two front desk ladies standing at the front desk were holding the landline and making a phone call nervously. Jin-won glanced over there and heard one of the men who was smashing things say, "Ask the person in charge to come out. We bid for a piece of land first." How did it become your MN Group overnight? Relying on the fact that the MN Group has been doing well in the domestic real estate industry in the past 2 years, you even dare to rob our Hing Chang's land, don't you? You guys sure have guts. Sir, don't be impulsive. This building is so tall that it will take a while for a normal person to take the elevator down from the office. Besides, as you saw at the bidding meeting last time, our CEO Xia is pregnant. Even if she wants to go downstairs, she has to wait. Don't smash things. After putting down the phone, the receptionist looked at the two tall men in horror and nervousness. She didn't dare to stretch her hand forward, but she still spoke carefully, lest she really broke something. What's wrong with being pregnant? You can rob our Hing Chang's land just because you're pregnant. You've taken the net profit of that land. Do you think our boss doesn't make a living? How dare you rob the land we agreed on? Do you really think the real estate industry in High City belongs to your MN Group? Chapter 425. Tell that Xia woman to come down right now. If she doesn't come out to see us today, I'll dig the baby out of her belly. Let's see if she can keep pretending. Seeing that the two men were about to turn around and smash the huge blue and white porcelain vase next to them, the company's security guards had already rushed over. Although the blue and white porcelain was not touched by them, several people were tangled together, and the scene was chaotic. CEO, you can go upstairs first. The staff member who had just led Jin-won into the door felt a headache when he saw this scene. He stood by Jin-won's side and whispered, "What's going on? Do they often come here to make trouble?" Jin-won didn't enter the elevator but stood by the elevator door and looked in that direction. The staff member stood behind her and whispered, "Last month, the boss of Hing Ching Real Estate Company went to the government to get a piece of land for a new square. The government was about to bid for it, but this month, they suddenly accepted our bid. I don't know what they were thinking. They had already negotiated with Hing Ching, but they changed their mind halfway and put our bid in, so the project became our company. The boss of Hing Ching Real Estate Company is a tough guy. It said that he used to be a gangster, and even the government had to give in to him, but now the government put the blame on us, saying that we gave up enough profit. Now I don't know if there's any conflict between Hing Ching and the government, but the person in charge of the bidding pushed our company out as a shield." With that, the staff member saw several more security guards coming in. Fearing that these people would bump into Jin-won, he hurriedly pulled Jin-won aside and whispered, "Our company has been in the limelight these years. It was just a branch company, but now it's said that the headquarters will be moved back. Many local real estate companies and technology companies in High City want to target us. CEO Xia didn't want to tell you about this, but I didn't expect that you would see this as soon as you came back." Hearing this, Jin-won didn't speak and turned to look at the elevator. The number on the elevator went down from the top floor. It seemed that Xia Tian was about to come down. She glanced at the group of people who were twisting into a ball and said coldly, "Call the police first." Then, she was about to go over. However, the staff hurriedly pulled her back. "If we could have called the police, we would have done so long ago. These people have come to cause trouble several times. It's just that they were just threatening before and didn't really smash things. Who knew that they would actually come and smash things today? Their boss has some connections with the police. Even if you have connections, you should call the police first." "Do all the police stations in Hai Ching have connections with them?" Jin-won asked. The staff was stunned for a moment before nodding. "All right." Jin-won coldly turned her eyes away and walked over. She walked into the crowd surrounded by security guards. Some of the security guards had seen Jean Wan in photos, and some didn't know her. Seeing such a young and beautiful lady suddenly coming in, some of them hurriedly raised their hands to stop her. Jean Wan pushed them away and looked coldly at the two strong men who had just pressed 3 or 4 security guards to the ground. "I'm in charge of this place. If you have any problem, just say it. Do you smash things to show that you are not to be trifled with, or do you just want others to see your ugly, rabid behavior?" The two men immediately glanced at her fiercely. They thought they would see Xia Tian, the pregnant woman, but they didn't expect it to be a beautiful woman in a red dress with a perfect figure. They immediately snorted coldly, pushed away the arm of a security guard who had just been twisted, stood up, and walked over. The two men were at least 1.9 meters tall. The moment they stood up, the people around them subconsciously took a step back. Jean Wan stood still and looked at the two men calmly and coldly. They stood in front of her and looked her up and down for a long time with fierce faces, but the woman in front of them was not inferior to them at all. One of the men suddenly sneered, reached out to pinch her chin, and reached out to her in a very disrespectful gesture and movement. But before his hand touched her chin, Jean Wan still didn't move and said in a low and indifferent voice, "Since the government chose to give that land to MN Group, it means that your company has lost the negotiation with the government. Hengqin Company was abandoned by MN Group and lost the first round. What you should do now is to go to the government to find out the truth and find a way to protect yourself instead of smashing things here. You can smash things here, but I'm afraid you can't afford the price." The tall man who had just raised his hand paused. For a moment, he didn't seem to understand what Jean Wan meant, but her fearless aura made the two men look at her up and down in confusion, as if to determine if she was really in charge of this place. Wasn't it said that the person in charge of High City MN Group was Xia Tian? Where did this woman come from? That's right. It's obvious that you're not strong enough and only want to get benefits. You went to the government, but in the end, you still failed to get this piece of land. Instead of thinking about the problem, you came directly to MN to make trouble. Does the boss of Hengqin really think that our MN Group is isolated and helpless in High City with only me, a big belly, in charge? Does he think he can step on us easily? Outside the crowd, Xia Tian, who claimed to be a pregnant woman, came over in a loose summer dress with a round belly. Although her belly was already very big, she didn't lose to others at all and even looked fiercer than Jean Wan. The two men took another look at Xia Tian and looked back and forth between Xia Tian and Jean Wan. One of them said angrily, "Which one of you is in charge here? You're as stupid as asking the parents of a child who is the legal guardian. Are you blind or are you too ignorant to know that you don't even know CEO of MN Group? How on earth do you survive in the real estate industry?" Xia Tian walked into the crowd and ignored the two men's fierce looks disapprovingly. She just leaned over to Jean Wan and whispered, "You've just come back, and you've already encountered such a disgusting thing. It's really embarrassing for me." Chapter 426. Xia Tian patted her belly gently as if she was touching a watermelon. Then she said calmly, "Isn't it obvious? There's no need to explain." Seeing Xia Tian's willing expression, it proved that this was indeed the crystallization of love and not the result of the previous life. Jean Wan's heart that had been hanging by a thread finally relaxed. Now was not the time to ask these questions. Jean Wan withdrew her gaze and looked at the two men. "From now on, if you have any problems, just tell me. Ms. Xia has helped me manage the affairs of High City for the past few years. Now she is about to give birth. Even if you want to make trouble, you don't have to target a pregnant woman who is about to give birth. If she is frightened by you and something happens to her, can you afford it?" The two men didn't take the pregnant woman seriously at all, but since Jean Wan had said so, they didn't want to get into trouble. They just said fiercely, "Don't King play with the pregnant woman. How dare you snatch Hing Cheng's land? You should give us an explanation or fall out with us. Are you going to fight against Hing Cheng in High City in the future? If you really have the guts, our boss doesn't mind." Xia Tian frowned and was about to speak because of their harsh words, when Jean Wan raised her hand and stopped her. She looked back and said, "Let CEO Xia go up first." Jean Wan. Xia Tian turned to look at her and said in a low voice, "The people of Hengqing are not to be trifled with. You have just returned to China. You don't know how many new real estate companies have been established in China in the past 3 years, and there are many in High City alone. The boss of Hengqing is not to be trifled with. I know. You go up first." Jean Wan gave her a reassuring look. How could Xia Tian be reassured? Although Jean Wan had experienced many twists and turns abroad in recent years, High City, a prosperous metropolis, was not much simpler than her international business struggles. She had just returned and probably didn't know the situation of the various companies in High City. Xia Tian wanted to say something, but after all, Jean Wan was back. Everyone could see who was the boss, and Xia Tian's current situation was really not suitable for such an atmosphere. Without saying a word, several staff members dragged her out. "Hey, you guys, don't pull me, damn it, as soon as Jean Wan comes back, I'm not your boss anymore, am I? You actually don't listen to me. I still have things to say to her. Don't pull me." When Xia Tian's voice was far away, Jean Wan said mildly, "If you have anything to say, come into my office." The two men immediately looked at Jean Wan's white and tender face with mocking smiles and raised their hands to touch it, saying, "Go to the office. The two of us and you." Their tone was disgusting, but Jean Wan remained calm. When the man's hand was about to touch her, before the man could see what was going on, his wrist was suddenly gripped hard by Jean Wan. With a slight twist, his wrist made a crisp sound. If Jean Wan used a little more strength, his wrist would be dislocated. The two men looked at her in shock. Jean Wan clasped one of their wrists. Seeing that the man in front of her turned pale because of the pain, she gave a lukewarm smile and said flatly, "Behave yourself in public. Hengqing is a famous company in High City. You can make trouble, but if you do anything else disgusting, I won't take any responsibility if your company's image can't be salvaged." Not only the two tall and strong men, but also the staff and security guards around them didn't expect that Jean Wan, who looked slender, could react so quickly and seemed to be good at martial arts. "I didn't expect you to be so good at martial arts." The man whose wrist was gripped by Jean Wan was about to pull his hand out, but as soon as he moved, he felt so much pain that he couldn't exert any strength in his arm. He looked incredulously at Jean Wan, who seemed to be very relaxed and didn't use much strength at all. Seeing this, the other man was afraid of losing face in front of such a woman and was about to reach out to help, but Jean Wan said coldly, "If you want to break his arm, you can do it." The two men froze on the spot. Hearing the noise, Xiao Ba had come downstairs and entered the crowd. When she saw this scene, her eyelids twitched, and she rushed behind Jean Wan and said loudly, "Don't underestimate women. Our CEO has learned martial arts from internationally award-winning martial artists. Your brute force can't even compare to the strength of a real human body's bones and acupoints. Believe it or not, if you dare to make trouble here, our CEO will break the bones in both of your arms." As Xiao Ba spoke, Jean Wan exerted a little more strength in her hand. In fact, she only exerted a little strength, but it was enough to make the man feel as if the tendons in his arm were about to break. Hearing this, the two men's arrogance was greatly reduced, but they still looked at Jean Wan discontentedly and even fiercely. You let go of me first. Do you still want to touch me? Jean Wan asked coldly. It wasn't until the man was forced to sweat by the pain in his arm that he finally compromised and said vaguely, "Let go of me. Let's talk." Jean Wan let go of him. Seeing the woman in a red dress put down her hand so effortlessly, the two men more or less believed what Xiao Ba said when she rushed over. Did this woman really know how to break people's bones? When Jean Wan coldly turned around and was about to walk out of the crowd, Xiao Ba quietly gave Jean Wan a look, and Jean Wan glanced at her calmly. The look was incomprehensible to others, but to the two of them, it seemed that they hit it off. How could she be as good as Xiao Ba said? But in the last year in London, Feng Ling went to England and stayed with Jean Wan for another year. During this period, Jean Wan was robbed by several foreigners after working overtime in the company at night. Although she didn't suffer any substantial harm, she began to learn some self-defense skills that day. So Feng Ling took some time out of Jean Wan's gym time every day. At first, she taught her some simple self-defense skills. Later, she found that Jean Wan was very willing to learn and had a good understanding, so Feng Ling designed a set of self-defense skills suitable for Jean Wan who had not undergone special physical training. She didn't need to use too much strength. She just needed to remember the most vulnerable parts of each person, remember every crack and vulnerable point of the human bones, and then combine them with the basic self-defense skills Feng Ling taught her. Chapter 427. Although Jean Wan was a good student, as Feng Ling said, she hadn't undergone rigorous physical training, so she was still weak in strength. She could only win with her wits. She could only bluff them temporarily with her little tricks. As long as the other party was scared, her tricks would work. But if the other party really wanted to beat her, she couldn't beat these two strong men. After all, they were both strong and tall, and she wasn't an iron wall. How could she beat them? But Xiao Ba was very smart and cooperated with her. With a few words, she successfully bluffed the two men. Maybe because Jean Wan had just come back from the UK, these people only knew that she was internationally famous this year and was on the Forbes list, but they didn't know her real strength. Jean Wan took the two men to her office, asked them carefully about the whole thing, and called the person in charge of the government to get a general idea of the matter. It turned out that the person in charge of the government had taken some benefits from Enchanting Company, but the higher-ups found out. On the day of the bidding, a big leader happened to be present, so they didn't dare to be too obvious, so they put the bidding documents of several big companies together. In the end, the big leader decided that MN Group would be in charge of the project. Later, when the people of Enchanting Company went to question them, they said that MN Group offered more profits and was more tempting. Although the other party didn't understand, their purpose was very simple. They wanted to use MN Group as a shield. After Jean Wan figured out the cause and effect, she couldn't defend the people in charge of the government, so she couldn't tell them the reason directly but had to solve the problem with the people of Enchanting Company in a roundabout way. Just when the two men were about to call their boss over, the police finally came late. The people of Enchanting Company did have something to do with the police. They just went through the motions and came in to make some statements. Before the problem was solved, they took the man away and let him go. That was the end of the matter for the time being. Although MN Group was indignant when they learned that the police released them after taking them away, no one dared to say anything. After all, the police on the west side of the city did have dealings with Enchanting Company. This was the way of the world, unless you had a stronger backer. The problem seemed to have been solved, but the contradiction between Enchanting Company and MN Group was still a dead knot, and Jean Wan had to find a way to untie it. Although there were some conflicts between many real estate companies in China, this type of conflict could easily snowball into a bigger and bigger one. In the office, Xia Tian pushed open the door with a big belly and looked at Jean Wan who was sitting behind the desk. I shouldn't have let them leave so easily just now. Didn't they say they were going to dig out the child in my stomach? I want to see if they have the guts to dig it out. Xia Tian walked in angrily. Clearly, she had not calmed down yet. Jin Wan glanced at her and then at her belly. How many months has it been? Xia Tian was quiet for a moment before saying, 8 months. Is she really going to give birth soon? Who on earth leaked the news to you? I've been hiding my pregnancy from you. Who dares to tell you? Why didn't you tell me? Are you going to come back to work as soon as you get out of the delivery bed? Jin Wan glanced at her coldly, turned on the computer, and typed on the keyboard. You'll take an official leave from today until the child is 1 year old. I haven't given birth yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Xia Tian came over, her round belly sticking out in front of her. Then she bent down, put her hands on the table, and looked at Jin Wan with a smile. Did you take a rejuvenation pill in the past 3 years in the UK? You're already 24 or 25, but your face and skin are still like that of a high school student. Have you gone against your growth? Jin Wan ignored her and continued to look at the report on the computer. As she read, she said, give me the things you have now and go back to take maternity leave. Seeing her so focused on work, Xia Tian put her hand behind her waist, held her belly, and paced back and forth, saying, you've just come back. I have to hand over the work to you for a few days. Let's talk about it in a few days. Anyway, as long as you're here, it's okay for me to do odd jobs and occasionally help you look at the documents. Okay. Jin Wan closed the report page on the computer, let go of the mouse, leaned back in the chair, and looked lightly at Xia Tian's belly. I didn't see you hold a wedding, but your belly is already so big. Is the baby legally born? Have you gotten the marriage certificate? The corner of Xia Tian's mouth twitched. Yes. When? It's our little criminal police officer. He dragged me to the hospital when he saw me vomiting in the morning. When he found out that I was pregnant, he took me to get a marriage certificate without any hesitation. He even used his connections in various agencies to transfer my household registration that I couldn't steal from my home in S-City. Then, he directly got a marriage certificate. Jin Wan raised her eyebrows. You used to call me a blockhead, smelly and stubborn, but now you've become a little criminal policeman? Xia Tian didn't explain but just touched her belly and said, in fact, he wanted to hold a wedding, but as soon as he got the marriage certificate, he suddenly had a drug arrest mission and was away for more than half a year. Before I could react from a young girl to a young married woman, I became a huge husband watching rock in high city overnight. Alas, I really regret it. I shouldn't have impulsively gone to get the marriage certificate with him. Clearly, Xia Tian's face was so sweet that honey was almost dripping out of it, but she was still sighing and saying that she was a husband-gazing stone. Jin Wan was expressionless. In fact, if you want to get a divorce, it's not difficult. Speaking of divorce, I have some experience. Do you need me to teach you? Xia Tian gave her a sideways glance. If I get a divorce, will you be the father of my child? Jin Wan smiled. Sure. Xia Tian rolled her eyes. Don't ruin the flowers of the motherland. If my child can't tell the difference between a man and a woman in the future and can't figure out whether the father is a man or a woman, it will be bad. As she spoke, she glanced at Jin Wan, thought for a moment, and said, after moving the headquarters of the company in London here, should we move it to this building? In fact, it's quite inconvenient in the west of the city. There are often traffic jams from here to the city center. There are several new high-rise office buildings in the city center. We can buy them. Chapter 428. It's the current High City branch of the Shine Group, the predecessor of the MO Corporation. The land next to it used to be a bank, but it was demolished and rebuilt. Now it's an office building with more than 80 floors, as tall as the Shine Group. Xia Tian wanted to say that if Jin Wan's office was on the top floor, she could be Mo Jingshan's neighbor. After all, they had the same height, the same floor, and the same floor-to-ceiling windows. They could see each other as soon as they turned around. However, before Xia Tian could finish her words, she saw Jin Wan's expressionless face. Jin Wan. No. Xia Tian. But although this building is big enough, MN Group is not an ordinary small company in the world. It ranks among the top 10 Chinese companies. Don't you feel aggrieved staying in an office building on the west side of the city? Why should I feel aggrieved? High City is so big, and there are many office buildings in the city center. If the west side can't accommodate it, we can go to the east, north, or south of the city or the commercial district. Although the office buildings on the commercial district are expensive, we can afford them. Why do you want me to go to the city center? Xia Tian choked for a moment. She didn't say anything more to avoid provoking her. That night, when the people of MN Group got off work, Xia Tian asked Jin Wan on behalf of several old colleagues in the company if she would like to have dinner with them in the evening. However, when they reached the door of the office, they saw that Jin Wan had come out. The woman in a red dress was beautiful. Even if she just walked out of the office, she was dazzling, and several male employees who had just passed by on this floor stared at her. Xiao Ba and the others asked if you want to have dinner tonight. Let's talk about it another day. I just came back today. I'll go home and tidy up tonight. Jin Wan pressed the button of the elevator and said indifferently, I don't need to rush to the company. I have to go back to the Ji family. I haven't asked about Ji Mengran for the past 2 days, but recently I heard that there seems to be some news about her. I have to go back and have a look. Okay, then let's move the dinner to the weekend. You haven't been back for more than 3 years, and we old colleagues have been helping you keep the family business in High City. We should get together. Sure. As Jin Wan spoke, the elevator door opened. She turned back and smiled at Xia Tian and the colleagues behind her. Everyone, see you tomorrow. Even when the elevator door closed, Xia Tian still stood there and looked at the door. After a long silence, she turned to look at little Mina, who was about to turn around and go to work. She reached out and grabbed her clothes. Xiao Ba stumbled as he was pulled. He quickly stabilized his body and turned around in surprise. Sister Xia. Xia Tian pointed to the elevator with her chin and asked, Has Jin Wan been like this in England all these years? What state? Little 8 was a little confused. Just like that. Didn't you say that Mr. Vince often went to England for the past 3 years? Didn't you say that Mr. Vince had been pursuing her, but she had never fallen for him? Did she mention Mo Jingshan? Little 8 shook his head. Never mentioned it. Regarding Mo Jingshan, she hasn't mentioned a single word. Little 8 continued to shake his head. Indeed, he never mentioned it. That night, Jin Wan returned to the apartment of more than 200 square meters that she bought 3 years ago before she went to London. The apartment was near the original office building and was still some distance from the west side of the city. Xia Tian had arranged a car for her to drive back, but in the past 3 years, many roads in High City had been built. She was afraid that she might not be familiar with many roads and take the wrong one, so she didn't drive but took a taxi back. In fact, she had only lived in this apartment for 2 or 3 days. After leaving a lot of luggage here, she left and didn't even clean up the room. She opened the door and went in, only to find that nothing had changed inside, but no one had come in to clean it for 3 years. All the furniture was covered with dust, and the suitcases were also covered with a thin layer of dust. Jin-won walked in with the suitcase in her hand and called the security guard to hire an auntie from a cleaning company. Together with the auntie, she spent more than an hour cleaning up the apartment inside and outside. When the aunt left, Jin-won went inside and opened the suitcases she had left behind. The clothes she had worn in High City 3 years ago reappeared in her sight, the computer she had used 3 years ago, some paraphernalia, all kinds of. She might live here for a while, so she hung all the clothes she could still wear in the cabinet. When all the suitcases were empty, she picked up the last suitcase and took out all the things in it. She saw the velvet box at the bottom. She paused, looked at the velvet box for a few seconds, and then looked away. She knew it was the blue diamond in it. She picked it up, threw a pile of mobile phones, computer chargers, and other things into the drawer in the middle of the cabinet, closed the drawer without looking at it, and turned to continue to pack other things. It wasn't until 11 o'clock at night that Jin-won took a shower and sat down on the sofa tiredly. There were still some daily necessities she hadn't bought. She would buy them tomorrow night. She was really exhausted tonight. After taking such a long flight and dealing with the problem of Hing-Ching Company, she hadn't rested until now and was seriously out of strength. Just as Jin-won was about to fall asleep on the sofa, her cell phone suddenly beeped, indicating that the cell phone was low on battery. She touched the sofa with her eyes closed and took a look at the cell phone. There was only 5% battery left. She had just returned to China and didn't know how many things she had to do and how many calls she had to answer from tomorrow. No matter how tired she was, she got up and went back to the bedroom, opened the cabinet, and took out the charger from the drawer. As soon as she took out the charger, the velvet box she had thrown in the cabinet was scratched open by a wire, and the blue diamond safely placed in it fell out of the box, fell on the carpet at Jin-won's feet, rolled on it, and finally stopped. Jin-won paused for a moment and lowered her eyes to look at the blue diamond on the carpet. She slowly plugged in the charger, squatted down, and picked up the blue diamond. The light in the bedroom was not turned on, and the blue diamond was reflected by the moonlight coming in through the window. If she suddenly decided to return something that she couldn't return 3 years ago, she would be provoking Grandfather Mo and the Mo family. But if she didn't return it, what should she do with this diamond? Would she just leave such a precious thing at home for no reason? Chapter 429. The next morning, Jin-won went back to the Ji family. In the past 3 years, Ji Hongwen was still the same. When he was in good health, he could walk alone, but when he was in poor health, he had to walk slowly or ask his assistant to help him. Fortunately, Ji Hongwen didn't have any serious illness, so the Ji family didn't go bankrupt, and Ji Hongwen didn't die in the hospital. Instead, the Ji Corporation was more stable in the business circle than before because Jin-won invested a sum of money in some new projects. Dad, didn't you say Mengran returned to High City 2 years ago? Didn't she tell you where she was in the past year? Jin-won helped Ji Hongwen walk on the lawn in the front yard of the Ji family. Ji Hongwen smiled. No, it's good that she's still alive. She didn't want to tell me, so I didn't ask. Besides, she rarely returned to the Ji family in the past 2 years. Instead, he paused and took a look at Jin-won. Mengran almost doesn't regard the Ji family as her home. I rarely see her, but the only thing I'm sure is that she doesn't have to worry about food and shelter. She must have a good backer. A few days ago, I heard from a servant that she saw Mengran in the department store. She got into the Xing family's car. The Xing family? Xing Yihan. Jin-won's gaze faltered, and she exchanged a silent look with Ji Hongwen. Even though Ji Hongwen didn't say much, his meaning was obvious. He gave her some hints. But after all, Mengran was his daughter. He couldn't directly remind Jin Wan to be careful of the Xing family, but he wanted to let Jin Wan know. Jin Wan continued to walk with Ji Hongwen's help, saying, "I know. Don't worry. As long as Mengran doesn't target me, I won't make trouble for her." Ji Hongwen sighed, "I also hope that she won't target you. Even if she does, with her little ability, she'll just run in front of you and show her cowardice." "Of course not. Don't underestimate your daughter. Mengran is very thoughtful. She won't let herself be taken advantage of. Besides, she has Xing Yihan as her backer now, doesn't she?" Jin Wan curved her lips into a smile. She had said these words to make Ji Hongwen happy. Toward Ji Mengran, she had never intended to be soft-hearted. Ji Hongwen shook his head, coughed, and asked Jin Wan to help him sit down on the bench in the yard. After sitting down, Ji Hongwen sighed. "If Xing Yihan really loves her, then it's fine. But I know how he feels about you and Mengran. He won't easily change his mind. As for keeping Mengran by his side, I'm afraid he has other plans." When the two of them got together, it was nothing more than a superficial effort. To put it bluntly, they were using each other to get what they needed. Jin Wan didn't say much but just smiled. "Dad, don't worry. I'm not a child anymore. I'm in control of my own life. What path I want to take is also my own choice. It's useless for you to worry about it." Ji Hongwen nodded and sighed. "Yes, you've all grown up. I really can't care too much. Both of you have your own things to do, especially you. In just a few years, you have become the benchmark of young female entrepreneurs in the business world. I was not as good as you when I was young." With this, Ji Hongwen paused and then said, "It's been some years since your mother passed away. In a few days, when I feel better, accompany me to the temple to worship her. By the way, let her see how you look now, so that she can rest assured in heaven." "Okay." Jin Wan helped him up from the bench. In the afternoon, before the MN group got off work, Jin Wan went to the company. Seeing her, Xia Shi came over with her round belly and asked her at the desk, "Did you go back to the Ji family to see your father this morning?" "Yes." Before she said a few words, Jin Wan's cell phone rang. She asked Xia Tian to sit aside and not to keep swaying in front of her with her big belly. Then she picked up the phone, walked to the window, and picked it up. "Miss G, the things you sent from England to Los Angeles a few days ago were not received. Shall we send them back to London for you, or what shall we do with them?" "How could they not be received? Couldn't they have been sent back in the past few years?" "Well, these things were sent to the prison every few months. Elder Su passed away 2 years ago. If Su Jilan couldn't receive them, no one in the Su family could receive them for her. But I forgot to tell you that Su Jilan committed suicide by taking poison in prison at the end of last month." Jin Wan's expression remained unchanged as she looked at the street outside the French window. "Committed suicide by taking poison?" "Yes, Su Jilan committed suicide on the 28th of last month." "I got it. Destroy all the things I sent." "Okay. Do you have any other instructions, Miss G? How did she die? Was it because she had taken chronic poison for a long time?" The person on the other end of the line was surprised. "How did you know?" Jin Wan didn't speak anymore and hung up. Jin Wan had just come back yesterday, so they didn't have a chance to talk much. Xia Tian waited for her all morning and finally got her back. However, Jin Wan stood by the window after answering the phone. Even though she could only see her back, she looked so cold that she didn't dare to approach her. "What's wrong?" Xia Tian asked. Jin Wan turned back to her desk and sat down in silence. Su Jilan was dead. She committed suicide by taking poison. Jin Wan had contacted Su Shui's parents and asked them to send Su Shui's belongings and Su Shui's childhood diary to her. She had read Su Shui's childhood diary and specially selected the pages where Su Shui wrote about how good she was with cousin Su Jilan, how they went out to play together, and how they loved each other as sisters. She sent the diary and Su Jilan's belongings to Su Jilan's prison every few months as long as she had time. Su Jilan was a silly cousin who always thought they loved each other so much that she sacrificed her life, and Su Jilan was a cousin who was locked up in prison and deprived of freedom forever. Jin Wan had never forgotten the pool of blood that flowed between her legs after she fell off the Los Angeles freeway. She had never forgotten to avenge her child. Even though Su Jilan had gotten the punishment she deserved and was losing weight in prison, and even tried to commit suicide several times, she still tortured her mind with these things again and again. Before flying back to High City from London, Jin Wan sent Su Shui's last diary and belongings to her, but she didn't expect that Su Jilan was dead. Chapter 430. How could it be exactly the same? It was said that Su Jilan had tried to escape from prison, but she was caught before she could escape the encirclement. She mutilated herself in prison and even threatened the police by cutting herself with a blade. The police were indifferent and even transferred her to a dark prison where she couldn't even see the sun. It was as if there was a huge net that was pushing everything forward, pushing the original trajectory of everything forward repeatedly. Everything seemed to be the same as in her previous life. The only difference was that all the twists and turns and frame-ups Jin Wan had experienced were done for her by others. When the truck driver died of poisoning in prison, Jin Wan wondered if the real cause of her death in her previous life had something to do with Su Jilan, and if Su Jilan had always regarded her as a thorn in her side. But now Su Jilan's experience and cause of death were almost copied from Jin Wan's. Except for the difference between Los Angeles and High City, and the twists and turns in the middle, the cause and the result were the same. Even 7 years earlier, everything had returned to the original point. Who on earth was driving all this? Jin Wan's life had been completely turned upside down in her previous life, but now it was completely righted. If everything went according to the trajectory of her previous life, then Jin Wan, the lifeline that was broken by Su Jilan, now fell on Su Jilan's head. Did this mean that the murderer of her previous life took over this trajectory for her? Did she die because of the cause and effect of her previous life? If she hadn't been reborn, Jin Wan would never have such a bizarre idea, but at this moment, she had to think so. So, was there some kind of omen, or was it all caused by someone? On the weekend, Jin Wan accompanied Ji Hongwen to the temple. In the past, Ji Hongwen had the habit of visiting the temple every year. However, at that time, Jin Wan was still young and her temperament was unstable. He was afraid that she and Ji Mengran, these two little girls, would be disrespectful to the various gods in the temple, so he never brought them here. After your mother passes away, I'll come here when I have time. Go inside and burn some incense. Ji Hongwen handed 3 lit incense sticks to Jin Wan. Jin Wan received the incense and turned to enter. After that, Jin Wan accompanied Ji Hongwen to worship in the temple for more than half an hour. Seeing that Jin Wan didn't seem to be used to the atmosphere in the temple, Ji Hongwen patted her hand and said, "I'll go inside for a while and talk to a master I've known for many years. You can walk outside or find a shady place to sit down and wait for me." Jin Wan nodded. It was rare for her to return home, so she was patient. All right. When Ji Hongwen went inside, Jin Wan turned around and found a place with few people on the bluestone path in the temple to stand for a while. Then she felt the sun was too hot, so she turned to rest under an ancient banyan tree that had grown here for who knew how many years. She had heard that it was best not to touch a cell phone in the temple, let alone take photos. Bored, she pulled out her hand that had reached into her bag. She heard someone next to her shaking the lot holder and mumbling something. She looked around and saw that many people were shaking the lot holder. After more than half an hour, it was almost afternoon, and there were fewer and fewer people. Looking at the lot holder quietly placed there, she didn't know what she wanted. Perhaps it was too boring to wait here, so she got up and picked up the lot holder. She imitated those people and shook it for a long time until a brand new long red lot fell on the table. Jean Wan glanced at the round shape drawn with a golden pen on the long lot and felt a little strange. She really couldn't understand it, so she picked up the other long lots in the lot holder and found that many of them were written with the words top, bottom, middle, and so on, but there were also some pictures and words that she couldn't understand, and the content of each lot was different. She picked up the one that had fallen out and turned to an old master who was also enjoying the shade under the tree. "Master, may I ask you to interpret the lot?" Just now, she saw that the people who had shaken the lot earlier seemed to come to this old master. The old master glanced at her, then at the long lot in her hand, and immediately looked at her in surprise. "Little girl, did you shake it out or deliberately draw it out from inside?" "Of course I shook it out." The old master took her long lot, looked at it for a while, and smiled. "Don't you find that the other long lots in the lot holder have become lighter in color and look very old? Only this one is new. I found it." Jean Wan had just noticed it. Since ancient times, the lot holders in all temples have been very meaningful. They usually carry incense, so if there are no special circumstances, the lot inside will not be changed, but the one before this long lot, probably because it has been too long, the circle on it has become dilapidated and lost the meaning of the circle. So only this lot has been replaced with a new one. It was changed not long ago, and the new lot hasn't been weathered much. It is lighter than the other lots, and it is very difficult to shake it out. During this time, no one has been able to shake it out, but you are the first one to shake it out. Jean Wan didn't quite understand what he meant, but seeing the old master smiling, she asked patiently and casually, "So? What's the meaning of this circle?" A circle is a line centered on a point, always around a central point, walking along the same trajectory, without deviation or break point. The old master said with a smile, "It indicates perfection, the completeness of the trajectory of your life, and the return to the origin, which means that you will never go astray again." Jean Wan looked at the circle on the long lot and froze. The origin again. She had heard this word many times 3 years ago. If you had gotten a long stick that hadn't been changed before, the circle wouldn't be complete. After being exposed to the wind and the sun, there would be many broken points, and the stick would be full of danger. However, this new stick that you got means that you've avoided those broken points. Come to think of it, it's strange. This sign has been here for more than 10 years, but it was changed just before you shook it out. It seems that you must have had some unusual experience to be able to jump over those broken tracks. This new circle perhaps represents a brand new life, which means that it's very complete. The old master put his palms together and bowed to her, then turned to continue to interpret the lots for others. Jean Wan stood by the side, holding the long lot and looking at the new circle without any broken points. A new life. Chapter 431. In 2 weeks, all the procedures for MN Group's headquarters to move back to China had been completed, and many tricky things had been handled. In the end, Jean Wan decided to temporarily set the company's headquarters on the west side of the city and bought 2 more 30-story office buildings behind the original office building. In the past few years, because the company was just established in the UK, there were many social events to attend, so Jean Wan's alcohol tolerance really soared. Now she was no longer the kind of person who would collapse after 1 or 2 drinks, but she still instinctively disliked alcohol. During the period after returning to China, Jean Wan cultivated herself and didn't drink or socialize. Except for the old staff dinner she attended once, she basically went to work during the day and returned to her apartment after work at night. She went to bed early and got up early, adjusting her life to a very regular pattern. She was much better than when she first returned to China. Xia Tian might go into labor at any time this month. Sometimes she almost couldn't walk in the company with her hands on her waist, but she still refused to rest at home. Jean Wan arranged an office for her and asked her to read the company's documents from time to time. She didn't need to worry about other things. But Jean Wan hadn't decided who would be promoted to vice president, so she had to deal with some trivial things in person. For example, this Friday, there would be a real estate and architecture exhibition held in the High City Exhibition Center. Because many provincial and municipal leaders would go, the leaders of major real estate companies or companies involved in the real estate and construction industry would go. Xia Tian couldn't attend this kind of event now, so Jean Wan had to go. Boss, it is said that many famous people in High City's business circle will go to this exhibition. It seems that in addition to the exhibition, there will be a bidding conference, and then the Municipal Tourism Bureau will invite all the distinguished guests to try to stay in the newly built seaside resort in the south of High City for 2 nights, but the quota is limited. It seems that I can't go with you. Xiao Ba handed the exhibition invitation to Jean Wan and said with a regretful and disappointed expression. Try to stay for 2 nights. Hasn't High City been expanding its tourism industry for the past few years? That seaside resort was jointly built by the government, the city's tourism bureau, and several well-known companies in the city. It's about to open to the public, but before it opens to the public, we're inviting you industry bigwigs to enjoy it first. To put it bluntly, we're inviting you bigwigs to the site in person. It's also a form of advertising for the resort. After all, so many bigwigs have tried staying there before. Let's go to the exhibition first. As for the invitation to stay, we'll see how it goes. Jean Wan put down the invitation and glanced at Xiao Ba. If you want to go, why don't you go for me? The corner of Xiao Ba's mouth twitched. The people going there are all extraordinary people. In our entire company, only you and Sister Xia can go. After all, one is the president and the other is the vice president. If I, as a special assistant, go, won't I be giving our MN group a hard time? Jean Wan couldn't help chuckling at Xiao Ba's choice of words. She glanced at her. Which big boss in the business world isn't busy every day? How would she have the time to attend such an event? Anyway, it's the face of the leaders of the province and the city. No matter how busy they are, there will always be a lot of people who will go, even if it's just a formality. Jean Wan didn't say more. Anyway, there were still 2 days before Friday, and there was no hurry. As Xiao Ba said, she would go as a formality. Boss, don't take it lightly. Boss, don't take it lightly. Sister Xia has talked to me before. You may not know how terrible the change in High City's business circle has been in the past few years. 3 years ago, some of the companies that you were familiar with closed down or were acquired. However, many companies have risen in the past 3 years, so you may not know many of them, and you may not know the current situation in High City. The cooperation between business and government has always been the trend in the real estate industry, so they will definitely give you face. Okay, I'll definitely go, and I'll definitely pay attention to it. I won't be perfunctory, okay? Jean Wan tooted and threw the folder in her hand into her arms. Don't hang out with Xia Tian in the future. Now you're learning to nag like her. Then you can dress up well. Don't be too casual, okay? Jean Wan glanced at her again. Xiao Ba immediately took a big step back and quickly left the office before Jean Wan kicked her off the floor-to-ceiling window out of impatience. However, the truth was that on Friday afternoon, Jean Wan was dragged home by Xia Tian and Xiao Ba. Xia Tian had ordered a dress for Jin Wan in advance. It was a blue strapless evening gown. The color was very clean and fresh, which was Jin Wan's favorite style. However, Jin Wan couldn't understand why the two of them were so excited over such an event. They either reminded her to take it seriously or reminded her to dress up well. It was only the afternoon, but they had already dragged her home to help her try on her gown and do her hair. They had even bought her matching shoes. Jin Wan deeply suspected that they didn't want her to attend an event at all but to go on a blind date. After Jin Wan was forced to change her clothes, the stylist they brought pressed her onto a chair and did a simple hairstyle. Xiaoba had just stood up when she heard Xiaoba shouting from behind, "Oh my god, it's too beautiful. Boss, this blue isn't something an ordinary person can handle. You're really too white. Sob, 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 I'm so envious, jealous, and hateful. You look so beautiful in this color." Xiaoba stamped her feet excitedly as she spoke and then turned her eyes to Xia Tian with a sneaky smile. Jin Wan glanced at her indifferently. "What on earth haven't you two told me? Isn't it just an exhibition?" "It's an exhibition, but it's rare to see such a gathering of big shots. You're the pillar of our company, and you've just entered the Forbes list this year. Many people are curious about you. Since you've returned to China and it's your first time attending such a large-scale event, you can't bring shame to our company, can you?" Xia Tian said and stared at Jin Wan's neck. "Is there something missing?" "There is indeed something missing." Xiaoba also stared at Jin Wan's neck. "Such a beautiful collarbone. It would be perfect if there were a beautiful diamond in the middle." Jin Wan's eyelids twitched. Before she spoke, the two women ran into her bedroom and rummaged for a long time but couldn't find any jewelry. Just as Xia Tian was complaining that Jin Wan didn't even have jewelry in her house, Xiaoba opened the drawer in the middle of the cabinet. A moment later, she shouted, "Found it." Chapter 432. On the night of the exhibition, Jin Wan arrived at High City's exhibition center by car. Before alighting, she thought for a moment before removing the necklace from her neck and placing it in her bag. At that time, the stylist that Xiaoba and Xia Tian brought along carried several platinum necklaces with her. This type of stylist was familiar with the preferences of the rich ladies of the upper class. Nowadays, many people like to buy these types of uncut diamonds to keep at home. Whenever there was a banquet or event, they would pick out some nice-looking necklaces to match. In the middle of the necklaces, there was a semi-net made of platinum that perfectly fit the blue diamond, turning it into a luxurious blue diamond necklace. When she wore it back then, it was indeed beautiful. This 10-carat blue diamond was too rare, and a blue diamond of such purity was even harder to find in the world. Wearing it like this at such a gathering of important people would be too conspicuous. MN Group had been rising rapidly in the past few years and was viewed as a thorn in the side by many in the industry. Having just returned to the country, it would attract the attention of many in the industry. It was better not to attract too much attention, so Jin Wan decided not to wear it. After alighting from the car, a staff member at the entrance of the exhibition center was responsible for checking the invitation in her hands. He then respectfully guided her to the red carpet. After passing through the red carpet, she would arrive at the main entrance of the exhibition center. Jin Wan smiled and walked toward the red carpet. Just as Xiaoba had said, High City's upper class had undergone a change of dynasties in the past 3 years. Many of the important people were unfamiliar faces. Even if there were a few who looked familiar, almost none of them recognized Jin Wan. The woman was dressed in a blue dress that perfectly complemented her graceful figure. Her exquisite face was lightly made up, and her fair and tender skin appeared pure and clear under the lights of the exhibition center. The convention center was not a place that ordinary people could enter. The people present were either the heads of famous companies or the young ladies of influential families. Some of them had seen Jean Wan at other banquets and could more or less recognize her. However, they did not dare to recognize her at this moment. In the past, Ji Ming was already beautiful enough, but now, on this red carpet, everyone present seemed to have become the background. The woman in the blue dress was like a goddess walking out of a Western painting, elegant and sexy. This kind of blue softened the pure beauty of Eastern women, and her fair and delicate face seemed to be the most precious treasure in the world. As the saying goes, a woman is all about her bones, not her skin. What's rare is that she has a good appearance and a beautiful body. There's not a single part of her that can be picked on. Even some of the media hidden in the crowd couldn't help but raise their cameras to take pictures in that direction. Jean Wan strode forward as though there was no one around, allowing everyone's eyes to fall on her. She smiled politely at the people around her, lifted the hem of her skirt that reached her feet, and walked into the main entrance of the exhibition center under the guidance of the security guards. She was neither early nor late. She was at least 20 minutes earlier than the time stated on the invitation. There were already many people gathered in the exhibition center. In the center of the hall, there was a huge overlooking model of the entire high city that was thousands of meters wide. Every building and location that was built or tendered by the major companies was marked out. From time to time, people in the crowd greeted her. Some knew her, some didn't, and even if they didn't know her before, they had studied MN Group because of Jean Wan's ranking on Forbes this year and had seen her photos. Jean Wan smiled at everyone who greeted her and did not say much. At most, she would say, "Hello." At 7:00 in the evening, the exhibition had already begun. Before Jean Wan could go to the location with her company's logo, she suddenly heard the whispers of several reporters not far away. "Earlier, I heard from the people at the entrance that Shine Group CEO Mo is here. Hurry up and go take some pictures. It's rare to get CEO Mo's face. He's been in Los Angeles for the past few years and hasn't appeared in front of the media since returning to China. Hurry up and take some pictures, hurry up." As the reporters turned around and quietly rushed toward the entrance, Jean Wan turned around and saw that there were already quite a number of people in front of the exhibition center. Shen Mu raised his hand to stop the reporters from getting too close. At the same time, he smiled politely and greeted the reporters, telling them not to take any pictures. This was an official event, not some celebrity news event. It was not suitable for the reporters to participate. By Shen Mu's side, there was a quiet, tall, and yet extremely eye-catching figure. His face was cold and handsome, like an outstanding creation of God's uncanny workmanship. The man's suit was well ironed, and his shirt was buttoned up to the top. He was meticulous, cold, and noble. His eyes were deep and clear, and his tall figure was much taller than Shen Mu, who was 1.8 meters tall. In the eyes of many women, this man who was rarely seen was mysterious, obstinate, and cold and seductive. It was this man who, in just a few seconds, caused the smile on Jean Wan's face to subside slightly. In the past 3 years, she never thought that there would be a day when they would meet again after such a long separation. Perhaps from the moment this man pushed her away step by step, she should have guessed the result. Perhaps it would be another 10 years of separation, or perhaps they would never meet again in this lifetime. However, on the flight back to China, after learning about Shine Group's movements from Shen Mu, she did not think about these things anymore. For example, she was not surprised to see Mo Jingshan here, but it was indeed a little sudden. Although it had been a long time since she asked about him, Jean Wan had roughly heard from others. For example, he had become colder and more decisive in the business world, and was even more taciturn than before. He seemed to be the same as before, working, socializing, and doing whatever he had to do. He did not reveal the slightest hint of his emotions in front of others, but the people around him and his business partners were all very careful, afraid that if they were not careful, they would step on a landmine and be destroyed by the powerful Shine Group. Because of the scene in front of the convention center, Jean Wan's expression did not change much. She directly withdrew her gaze, as though everything had nothing to do with her, and walked to her company's seat. However, for a moment, she could not help but suspect if Xia Tian and Xiao Ba had dressed up so much today because they knew Mo Jingshan would come today. Jean Wan pursed her lips and took out the bidding documents from her bag. She listened to the city leader's speech, and not long after, she heard a faint commotion from behind. She indifferently glanced back, only to see Mo Jingshan walking in this direction of the crowd. Chapter 433. However, Shenmu's eyes were very sharp. He immediately spotted Jean Wan. After glancing in her direction, he approached and greeted her. CEO G. This time, he called her CEO G, not Miss G. Shenmu knew why Jean Wan would appear at this kind of exhibition, so he did not bring up the past. Jean Wan nodded at Shenmu and could not help but look at Mo Jingshan. For a moment, when their eyes met, the man's gaze fell on her side. His pupils were dark, and his gaze was clear. There were people all around them, and many of them were looking in this direction. Jean Wan smiled and casually greeted, CEO Mo, nice to meet you. 4 simple words. She did not even say long time no see. Instead, she said, nice to meet you, CEO Mo. Mo Jingshan nodded and gave her a very ordinary glance, as though it was indeed the first time they met in the business world and there was nothing special about it. The man shifted his gaze and walked toward the Shine Group's logo on the other side. At that moment, what Jean Wan saw in the man's eyes was the same deep, calm, and unperturbed as she remembered. The smile on Jean Wan's lips did not change, but it remained polite and slightly cold. This kind of peace was good. At least, no one needed to deliberately avoid it. Seeing that CEO Mo had left, Shenmu turned and smiled at Jean Wan. I don't think there's much opportunity to chat with Miss G on such an occasion. Did you come alone? Jean Wan did not nod or shake her head. She only curved her lips at Shenmu and slightly raised her hand to make an inviting gesture, meaning for him to go and not to be so polite to her. At the same time, when Jean Wan withdrew her gaze, she caught a glimpse of the black suit Mo Jingshan was wearing. It was as heavy in black as ever, as though it could completely drown out all the storms that had happened around him. Time had passed, but he did not seem to have changed at all. 3 years had flowed on him, and he had lost his usual reserved and gentle temperament, leaving only a hint of ruthlessness and indifference. He was just a few meters away, but it seemed as though he was already far away and even more unreachable. But the man was still handsome and tall, as though he was made of nature. Mo Jingshan was no longer the man she had been separated from for 10 years. He was also no longer the man who had doted on her endlessly and was even willing to die for her. He seemed to have become the most complete him. This was his true appearance. Seeing that she had no intention of speaking, Shenmu could only nod at her and turn to leave. Mo Jingshan had already gone to the other side of the aisle. He did not even look at her. This reunion came and ended abruptly. However, it was just right so that she didn't feel awkward or uncomfortable. After the exhibition, there was a party. Jean Wan was still considering inviting the guests to stay in the seaside resort. Earlier at the exhibition, she had seen 2 familiar figures. However, at that time, there were provincial and city leaders giving speeches. They were also discussing the development direction of High City with the business elites who were present based on the city's bidding and construction matters. It was not convenient for her to wander around in such a serious exhibition. At the end of the exhibition, melodious music rang in the exhibition hall. From time to time, people would raise their glasses and toast each other in groups of 3 to 5. From time to time, the CEOs of some companies who didn't have much impression of Jean Wan would raise their glasses to toast her. When they learned that Jean Wan was the CEO of MN Group, they repeatedly sighed in admiration. They handed their business cards and introduced each other to each other. Jean Wan couldn't leave them for a while. She was very beautiful. Her beautiful face and the faintly discernible coldness around her made men even more attracted to her. For such a woman, they really wanted to get to the bottom of it. At this moment, 2 old acquaintances suddenly came. When Ji Mengrand appeared in Jean Wan's sight holding Xing Yihan's arm, Jean Wan only looked at Ji Mingrand's face for a few seconds, as though confirming that she was really alive. However, Ji Mingrand's eyes were very sharp, as though there was a fire burning directly on Jean Wan. However, Jean Wan just glanced at her indifferently and raised her glass slightly. Ji Hongwen had already told her some of Ji Mingrand's situation, so he didn't intend to say anything to her. However, Ji Mengrand held Xing Yihan's arm and seemed to snuggle intimately. When Jean Wan raised her glass slightly, she raised her eyebrows and smiled at her. I thought you planned to live in England and never come back. I didn't expect that in just 3 years, you'd come back to High City. Is it because you can't make a living in London? Do you have to come back to a small place like High City? Jean Wan's indifferent gaze fell on her and then glanced at Xing Yihan beside her. When her gaze returned to Ji Mengrand, she gave a faint smile. High City is indeed a small place. I've only just come back and I've already met you. We've been seeing each other for so long. How small is this place? Mengrand, even though you've been missing for so long, you still came back. Is it because you can't escape the circle of High City, or because you haven't made a name for yourself outside and have no choice but to come back to find a backer? Ji Mengrand snorted and turned to look at the man beside her. Brother Xing, you haven't contacted Jean Wan for a long time, have you? She seems to know nothing about what happened between us. Xing Yihan's hand was placed by his side and was held tightly by Ji Mengrand. Even though Xing Yihan had no intention of being intimate in public, he paused and didn't push her away. He looked at Jean Wan, who was even more radiant than usual. After a moment of silence, he said mildly, It's only been a few years, but you've transformed from a little woman into a strong woman in the industry. It's indeed an eye-opener. But High City is a place where too many people gather. There are many things that you can't easily control. Since you've returned to the country, remember to be less aggressive and keep as low a profile as possible. These words sounded like a kind suggestion, but because Ji Mengrand was standing by the side, it seemed to be a kind of sarcasm. Jean Wan certainly knew that in the domestic business world, only by knowing when to advance and when to retreat could she protect herself. Although MN Group was now well known in the Chinese circle, after all, it hadn't been long since it was established. It wasn't difficult for it to be trampled under the foot of others. CEO Xing, are you saying kind words? Jean Wan glanced at him without batting an eyelid, casually playing with the champagne glass in her hand, and said in a cool and quiet voice, I have a clear view of my career, and I have some experience in ups and downs. But I heard. Chapter 434. Jean Wan paused and glanced at her with a faint smile. Do you also want to enter the real estate industry? Ji Mingrand's expression faltered. She glared at Jean Wan harshly. What do you mean by also want to enter the real estate industry? There are many real estate studios in High City, but the market demand is too high. I'm not young anymore. I should have my own things to do. Brother Xing has only invested a sum of money for me. Why? Are you afraid that my studio will grow stronger and stronger in High City and take away your business? I don't think so. I'm afraid it won't be so easy for you to snatch a piece of meat from my mouth. Ji-won smiled coldly and raised her glass to her. After all, we used to be sisters who grew up together. Since you are so confident that you want to try your luck in this industry, why don't I propose a toast to you first and wish you success, N. Ji-won's eyes were smiling, but the coldness and sarcasm in them made Ji Mingran's expression turn ugly. She didn't take her glass, but leaned against Xing Yihan's side. Brother Xing, I've greeted my acquaintance. Let's go. We have to go to the Huanhai Resort tonight. I don't know when we can sleep. Let's go rest for a while. Xing Yihan's gaze fell heavily on Ji-won. Ji-won could see that Xing Yihan had changed a lot over the years. He was no longer the lonely and brave brother Xing she used to be, nor was he as a famous orthopedic doctor in High City. He had been infected with the shrewdness and ambition of many businessmen, and he didn't restrain his ambition at all. But in front of Ji-won, he still restrained some of his emotions and said, "Goodbye." Ji-won didn't look at him anymore. She turned and left, not even intending to say goodbye. Seeing that Xing Yihan's gaze was still fixed on Ji-won's back as she walked away, Ji Mengran said with a smile, "We meet again. Do you still think you must have this Ji-won? Back then, you couldn't get her. Now that she's like this, I'm afraid it's even more impossible for you to get her. A woman who is too beautiful is very scary. A woman who is beautiful but has no heart is not someone anyone can resist." With that, Ji Mengran let go of his hand, but her face was still full of smiles. "Did you see that? She can even meet Mo Jingshan without batting an eyelid and pass by him emotionlessly, let alone you. What can she do to you?" Xing Yihan glanced at her coldly. "Take your money and do your work. Don't say things you shouldn't say in front of me. Don't forget where your life was saved. In front of me, you are not qualified to tell me what to do." Ji Mengran smiled, picked up a glass of wine on the waiter's tray, and put it to her lips, hiding the flash of hatred in her eyes. It was true that she didn't board the plane that crashed and managed to keep her life. However, due to a combination of circumstances, she was forced to flee the country and mistakenly boarded a pirate ship. In the end, she was trafficked to Africa. Because she lost her freedom, she was humiliated and invaded by countless people. Even she couldn't count them all. It was only when she was emaciated and covered in wounds that Xing Yihan found her and brought her back from that hopeless situation. Xing Yihan hired a psychiatrist to treat her for a year before she gave up the idea of suicide. But why did Xing Yihan save her? Ever since he followed Shinharu into the Ji family, he had wholeheartedly liked Ji-won. This kind of feeling would not change. As for saving her, it was because of the Ji family and Ji-won. Of course, there were other reasons. She knew this, and he also knew her unruly thoughts. The two of them seemed to be dating on the surface, but in reality, they were just taking what they needed. Not to mention sleeping in the same bed, they didn't even kiss each other. Xing Yihan found her disgusting, and she had no interest in him either. Once a person became infatuated with someone, as long as they couldn't get it, they would never forget it. Xing Yihan treated Ji-won this way, and she treated Mo Jingshan the same way. So what if he couldn't get it? At least, Ji-won couldn't get it. Ji Mengran drank the wine with a smile and gently touched the pink diamond necklace she specially wore to match her dress today. She said softly, "Brother Xing, I'm tired. I'm going to rest for a while. I'll come to you when I'm about to leave." Xing Yihan's eyes were cold and he didn't respond. Ji Mengran had long been used to this way of getting along with him. She smiled at him again, and when someone looked over, she leaned close to him. After saying a few more words intimately, she turned and left. Xing Yihan didn't show much expression from beginning to end. Only after Ji Mengran had gone far away did he gradually withdraw his gaze. His cold eyes glanced at Ji Mingran's back, and his gaze was cold and thoughtful. This time, the event in the convention center was very grand. Because of the long duration, some temporary resting rooms, dressing rooms, and changing rooms were set up on the second floor of the hall. Jean Wan toasted several glasses of champagne with many people who had worked with her or would work with her in the future. She turned around and noticed that only Shenmu was talking to the city leaders, but Mo Jingshan didn't seem to be here. With Mo Jingshan's identity, he only needed to show up on many occasions and didn't need to be present all the time. It didn't matter if he had already left, gone somewhere to rest, or had other arrangements. These were not things she could care about or be curious about. Jean Wan withdrew her gaze, chatted with several representatives of various real estate companies who came to greet her, and then waved at them with a smile. "Sorry, I've drunk a lot just now. I have to go to the resting room to sober up. I've not been able to hold my liquor very well in the past few years. I've just recovered a little, but I still have to restrain myself. Otherwise, I'll easily make a fool of myself in public." Most of the people in the hall were men. Hearing her words, they didn't force her to stay. Jean Wan went straight to the second floor. Someone was changing in the dressing room, so she simply pushed open the door of the ladies' dressing room. As soon as she entered, she saw Ji Mengran sitting on the sofa in front of a dressing mirror. The places where socialites and female entrepreneurs frequented were similar to the places where female stars frequented. Besides, it was such a grand occasion, so naturally, there would be 2 makeup artists waiting here to touch up any lady's makeup. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.